Hey guys, tonight we slip into a smoke-dark cottage at the edge of winter and learn, step by step, the plain tricks that keep medieval peasants alive till dawn. Banking embers under ash, sealing drafts in wattle-and-daub, layering linen and wool, warming stones for your feet, sharing heat with animals, and eating slow-burning food that works like a pocket hearth. You probably won't survive this if you treat it like a cozy experiment. Cold here is patient and takes the boastful first. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. While you settle in, post your location and local time in the comments. It's oddly calming to imagine these dim cottages glowing across the map like small, stubborn stars. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You trudge 2 careful steps on the earthen floor, tamped hard as pottery. Mainstream fact first. For countless medieval families, life happened in 1 or 2 room timber frames with wattle-and-daub walls, a tiny shutter, and a central hearth that warmed and smoked in equal measure. Not every cottage boasted a chimney. In many places the smoke sought its own slant through the thatch, painting the rafters the color of tea. The wind, insulted at being locked out, fingers the door and sulks. Bank the embers, not the blaze. You kneel, brush aside a quilt of ash, and uncover coals the color of dull cherries. Heap on fuel, and you'll trade steady heat for brag and headache. Feed the coals with thin sticks placed at the edge. Then tuck them back under ash. Ash is your nighttime blanket and throttle. It slows the burn, mutes the smoke, and buys you hours without a noisy flare. On the peg, a felted hood and a long wool nightcap, sleep's unflattering crown. You pull them on and feel wiser by 30%. Historians still argue whether peasants slept fully dressed or merely layered, but tonight you stack kindness. Linen to wick, wool to trap, mitts if you own them, pride surrendered to the peg. Your mirror, a polished pan, assures you fashion clocked out at sunset. Good. Fashion is terrible at warming noses. You tamp a rag into the window seam, and the draft's music fades from flute to whisper. You trim the rushlights' char, set the wick in its saucer of tallow, and the flame answers with a steady almond of light. Somewhere in your modern chest, a thermostat clears its throat. The cottage replies with routine. Latch, shutter, ash, cup, blanket, breathe. The paillasse, straw mattress, rustles like a barn full of opinions when you sit. You flip it to loft the straw, ignoring oat husks volunteering for sainthood by poking your calves. A blanket whose family tree is mostly patch slides onto your shoulders with an exhausted sigh. Another mainstream note. Thatch is insulation as much as roof. Deep, well-kept layers trap warmth and shed rain, while small windows barter daylight for heat. Fuel is money you can spend only once. You lay a dry stick at the coal's edge so it chars rather than flames. A clay pot warms at the hearth. You ladle thick pottage, barley, leeks, a brave echo of bacon, and taste central heating you can eat. Warmth walks outward from your chest, into fingers rehearsing a short piece called thaw. If you're hunting dessert, it's named sleep. Tiny joke aside, the lesson holds. Hot food is a portable hearth. Across the room, a cloak hangs wet from chores. You bring it nearer. Close, not foolish. There's no insurance here, only neighbors with buckets. You set a warmed brick at your feet inside a twist of linen. Some households used bed warmers, little pans for coals, but stones and thrift serve you tonight. Historians still argue whether such tools were common among poorer homes or borrowed on occasion. Your toes, newly civil, vote for stones. A scuff at the door reminds you winter keeps excellent attendance. You press the bar and run your palm along the sill, packing moss where the cold sneaks like rumor. Rings around the moon would warn weather, says one country saying. But the sky is a black lid, and you rely on nearer instruments. The rafters creak, the smoke slant, the heat that rises from buried coals like a kept promise. From the byre wall comes a gentle animal sweetness, a cow's breath paying part of the heating bill. You study the ember light shining like coins at a well's bottom. Fire here is not spectacle. It is an ongoing conversation. You negotiate warmth without granting the beams their deaths. The smoke tattoos your hair and will announce you tomorrow as person who owns fire. If your lungs compose a complaint, the alternative is a longer letter written by your bones in frost. You pin the hood's tip under the blanket so it won't wander in sleep. You cradle a wooden cup, the last sip of ale posset, and feel it press a small sunset into your chest. Your world tightens to what fits in the glow. The bed, the peg, the low table nicked like a familiar constellation. You smirk at the thought of telling tomorrow you invented minimalism. Your non-existent fitness tracker would accuse you of hibernation. Let it. Survival is the metric tonight. Back to the hearth. Ash over coals again, the gentlest tuck. The cottage answers with a shifting beam, an old shoulder settling. Outside, wind rehearses a speech and forgets the second paragraph. Inside, all you can control fits on a short list. Embers, shutter, latch, brick, blanket, breath. Historians still argue whether winters were universally harsher, or whether a chorus of bad years taught communities to remember mostly the worst. You live in the particular, this night, this room, this method. You slide under patched wool and let the straw cradle you with noisy kindness. The cap warms your ears. The brick radiates a quiet vote of confidence through your souls. Your eyes flatten like calm water, catching ember ripples. Far away, other cottages bank their own red hearts. You picture them as lanterns along a coast. The thought is a hand on your shoulder. No trumpets, no chapter 2. Only the soft grammar of survival. Do the small things, in the small order, until the dark grows bearable and the body remembers the trick of sleep. You tilt your head and let the cottage explain itself without words. The walls are not walls in a modern show home sense. They're a woven argument between sticks and mud, called wattle-and-daub. You trace the wattles, thin hazel rods interlaced between upright posts, and feel the daub's rough skin, a democratic mixture of clay, sand, chopped straw, and yes, animal dung. Consider it medieval spackle with personality. Your fingertip comes away dusty. You wipe it on your tunic like someone who has definitely always known this, and certainly didn't just learn it tonight. Underfoot is earth, tamped so hard it might as well have tenure. Sometimes a thin scatter of rushes or straw keeps it dryish and halfway dignified. When those rushes go stale, they get replaced, at least in theory. Though your nose quietly nominates this batch for retirement. You remember the foot brick from earlier warming your toes. Luxury, meet reality. If you drop that brick now, the floor will not complain. It has met worse. Look up, and the rafters stare back, lacquered with a century of smoke. Mainstream fact. Across much of medieval Europe, early cottages and simple hall houses vent smoke through a louver, a smoke bay, or just through the thatch itself, with true masonry chimneys taking hold later and unevenly. Your ceiling is a diary written in soot, black pages, black letters, each line a winter survived. The smoke does two clever jobs. It dries the thatch and discourages pests. Quirky tidbit alert. A smoke-cured roof is a surprisingly rude place for insects to raise a family. Apparently, no one told the moths this was a wellness retreat. You run your palm along the small shutter. It closes with a wooden bar and a conclusive thunk. Glass is rare and pricey for people like you. Some windows on better days might carry horn panes, thin, scraped plates from cattle horn, translucent enough to borrow daylight, stout enough to keep out weather with ideas above its station. More commonly, there's oiled linen or nothing at all, so the shutter is the real window. You stuff the seam with moss the way a careful baker pushes filling into a pie's edge, and the draft's keen little whine softens. Your breath becomes the loudest weather inside. At the corner stands a central post, swollen at the foot where damp and time have been taking turns. The timber frame around you is a slow forest you happen to live inside. Oak, ash, maybe elm, hewn to beams, joined with pegs, braced like a well-behaved choir. Cruck frames, those graceful pairs of curved timbers meeting at the ridge, are a familiar sight in some regions. You could hug one, but your arms have meetings with blankets and refuse to be late. The hearth explains the room's politics. Everything is arranged by distance from its glow. Sleeping happens in the zone of not freezing. Mending, spinning, shelling beans, those live in not smoky. The door, lofty gateway to the kingdom of rather cold, occupies a spot where you can talk to it sternly and bar it with one motion. You've already banked the coals under ash like a clever dragon. Now the hearth sits low and contented, offering the slow exhale the night requires. Historians still argue whether open hearth layouts persisted longer in poorer cottages than we tend to think, or whether partitions and early chimneys crept in faster through repair cycles and local fashions. Tonight, at least, your house prefers the old conversation. Smoke rising, heat pooling, people negotiating. You peer into the gaps around the doorframe. Every crack wears a scarf. Moss, rags, twists of straw. The house isn't airtight. This is not a jar of jam. But you can nudge it toward cooperative. At the hinge, a little crescent of moonlight tries to gossip in through the gap. You hush it with a folded bit of linen and a look that says, "Tomorrow." Your earlier rushlight licks the air with its almond flame. The smell of tallow keeps mice from sending a formal invitation. The cat would like to claim credit, but is currently asleep in a philosophical curl next to your warmed stone. In one corner, a ladder leans toward the loft. Loft, being generous. It is a platform where straw, spare tools, and children take turns. Sleep isn't strictly zoned. Pallets can slide, little bodies can migrate toward the warm. You test the rung. It answers with a creak that says it has hosted whole autobiographies. You decide that tonight your bed and gravity are on speaking terms. Up, you don't go. A soft jingle. The iron trivet by the hearth shifts, reminding you supper happened and was grateful. You pass a hand along the thatch's underside. It feels like the inside of a very patient animal. Thatch, when kept deep and tight, insulates beautifully. Deep eaves shed rain like a shrug. The smoke has stained it so thoroughly that, in this gloom, you could convince yourself the house continues upward into a night made entirely of roof. From outside, the ridge wears a modest curve. From inside, it feels like shelter invented on purpose. You consider whispering thank you to the reed cutters, but the wind outside has enough applause for everyone. A shelf near the hearth holds the brave family of containers. A clay pipkin, a wooden bowl, a little crock of salt with more aspirations than supply. A pewter spoon waits like a tiny oar that will never see a sea. You tap the bowl with a nail, and it replies with a slightly embarrassed clink, as though surprised to be included in an inventory. Your shoulders drop a fraction. Familiar things make good insulation for the mind. There's a peg rail, and from its decision-making height dangle lives. A hood, a patched cloak, a bundle of nettle fiber cord, tonight's hope of tomorrow's bread wrapped in cloth. You slide your hood's point under the blanket again, an old trick so it doesn't wiggle off in sleep. Somewhere between your ears, a stray modern thought wonders about interior design trends. You assure it that smoke-blackened chic will absolutely catch on any day now. At the byre wall, a cow stirs. Warmth rolls through the timber like a sigh. In many small holdings, the animals share space, or at least a wall with people. Manure piles, properly managed, become slow batteries of heat for the yard. That's not romance. That's thermodynamics wearing boots. Quirky neighbor knowledge says the hen that decides to roost on the ladder rung above your pillow is both alarm clock and confetti cannon. You glance toward the ladder with friendly distrust. You step into the doorbay and examine the latch. It's a simple drawbar with a faithful slot, designed to function in the dark by memory's map. Outside, some doors have a latch lifter string for late arrivals. Your household takes no chances with night visitors, human or wind, and ties the string in. The bar slides into place with the same satisfied sound as a well-placed final word in an argument. Conversation closed. The house clears its throat and becomes a blanket. Your fingers find the daub again. It's cool and surprisingly dry where the hearth's breath reaches. A hairline crack zigzags like a lazy river. You pinch a little clay and straw mash from the repair pot and smooth it in. There, you have just participated in architecture. Historians still argue whether frequent household patching was ritualized into seasonal chores or just happened as catastrophe demanded. Your vote is, whenever you can feel the wind telling secrets to your ankles. At the loft's edge hangs a simple curtain, linen gone midsummer cloud thin, defining a sliver of privacy that exists mostly in imagination and good manners. You lift it and peek at the straw sack bed beneath. The payas remembers every story and retells each as a friendly crunch. You fluff it with both hands and a theatrical woof, because sometimes warmth is psychological, and you are an accomplished actor with a strong straw-based repertoire. A beam carries little notches, a family calendar made with a knife. Harvest tallies, maybe, or lambings, or 3 proud lines for the day someone traded a basket for a better pot. Houses remember things people forget. The rafters store smoke, the floor stores footsteps, the pegs store absence when a cloak is out braving weather. You stand very still and listen. Wind. Animal breath. The embers' slow punctuation. Your own heartbeat, trying on the cottage's tempo to see if it fits. Before you lie down, you take one more round. Shutter snug, latch firm, seam stuffed, ash smoothed, brick warm. The one-room house contracts around you like a friendly fist. If you had glass windows, they'd reflect your face. Instead, the dark returns your outline as permission. You slip under the blanket and feel the cottage perform its party trick. With very little, it does enough. 3 light jokes in one room might feel crowded, so let's make the last a whisper. Your non-existent smart thermostat would hate it here. Your bones, 80 years from now, will still approve. You breathe with the house. Somewhere scholars will be counting chimney pots on old drawings and debating whether your roof had a louver in this decade or the next. Meanwhile, your nose reports fewer drafts, your toes report cooperative brick, and your eyelids file for early retirement. The room doesn't promise comfort. It promises enclosure. In a winter like this, enclosure is the most honest luxury. You squat by the hearth like a patient locksmith because the door you need to open is called morning. The flame you want is the small, thinking kind, not the show-off that licks rafters and eats a year's wood in one gossiping hour. You nudge aside the quilt of ash with the poker's tip, careful, gentle, as if waking a cat that pays its rent in affection and rodent policy. Under the gray, the coals glow a slow cherry red, tiny suns the size of coins, already humming the lullaby you need them to sing till dawn. Bank embers, not flames. You learned this last night and again tonight, because wisdom repeats until the body believes it. You pull 2 thin sticks from the bundle, dry as honesty, and lay them at the coal's rim so their edges char but do not catch. If they flare, you wait, fanning with your hand only enough to encourage a glow, not a brag. When the wood skins over with ember, you draw the ash back across like a blanket, tucking the edges the way you tucked your nightcap's point under the covers. A good banking looks like nothing much. That's the trick. Fire that sleeps is safer fire. Mainstream fact. In cottages without true chimneys, common for long stretches of the Middle Ages, households managed heat with an open hearth, letting smoke creep toward a louver, a smoke bay, or through the thatch itself. Banking under ash slowed oxygen, stretched fuel, and reduced sparks, which meant fewer panicked bucket lines and fewer apologies to neighbors about surprise skylights. The rafters above you wear their history in black gloss. You prefer to keep tonight's pages blank. You shuffle the trivet aside and hook the iron pot chain 1 link higher so the pipkin shoulders the warmth without boiling. Another way to store heat without spectacle. The embers now look like sleeping garnets under new snow. You test with the back of your hand, warm, steady, a low hum. Your non-existent thermostat clears its throat again. You inform it you've installed a medieval subscription called Ash with unlimited nighttime minutes. Take the bellows, wooden handles, leather lungs, and give 2 slow breaths near the covered edge. The ash whispers upward, and a faint red deepens under the gray like sunset reconsidering. Not too much. Bellows are for coaxing, not arguments. You set them down, handles crossed like a pair of resting oars. Quirky tidbit. Some towns rang a couvre-feu, cover fire. Bell at evening. Telling citizens to bank hearths and snuff lights. The word ambled into modern speech as curfew. Whether or not your particular village kept such a bell, the habit sticks because the house remembers it. Ash over coals, shutters barred, night made modest. Historians still argue whether curfew bells were widespread practical safety measures, or later romanticized by chroniclers who enjoyed tidy stories about tidy towns. Your cottage has no opinion on etymology. It appreciates that you are not trying to burn it for company. You choose fuel like a sommelier of heat. Thin kindling for the edge. A thumb-thick stick to become tomorrow's early ember. No wet log that would only sulk and smoke. Charcoal, when you can get it, burns hotter and cleaner. But coin is slow to visit this house. Tonight, plain wood serves, paired and honest. You scrape a few curls with your knife. They smell like a small forest remembering sun. Those go into the kindling pot for morning. Future, you will leave a thank you note on the inside of your skull. You keep your face turned slightly away. Even a modest hearth will surprise you with a mischievous spark. The rushlight on its pin watches like a well-behaved candle critic, its almond flame approving your restraint. The cat opens one eye to confirm you are doing things worth supervising, then returns to the philosophical curl perfected in Section 2. At the byre wall, the cow shifts and adds a warm exhale to the room's arithmetic. You smile. Your heating system moos. You slide a warmed brick from the hearth's lip, wrap it again, and set it back by your pallet. A small promise waiting for feet. You make a mental note. brick, then blanket. Then breathe. You've discovered that survival, like grammar, has its preferred word order. Change it, and the sentence turns into weather. The poker draws a soft furrow through the ash near the edge, just enough to check the ember's color. You want dull cherry, not glaring orange. Loud heat now costs heat later, the way spending all your kindness in one conversation leaves you broke for the next. You offer the hearth a pinch of dry straw only where the flame cannot leap. The straw thinks about it, decides the invitation is generous, and contributes a sigh that dies into glow before it can cause gossip. Your hands do a dance the house recognizes. Stir, smooth, sniff, listen. Low fire has a sound, a cross between a cat's purr and a sleepy kettle. Small periodic shifts of carbon as the wood releases its grudges. You keep one ear for that, one ear for the wind working on the shutter. One ear, you have borrowed a spare, for the subtle exhale that means the ash blanket is doing its job. You remember the first night you tried this and staged a heroic blaze that warmed the stars and then abandoned you at midnight. Tonight you aim for unheroic victory. Quiet wins. The cottage prefers introverts after dusk. Flames that talk loud are asked to leave. You pinch the rushlight shorter so it will not tilt and drip. The tallow smell keeps mice from filing a tenancy claim. Across the room, the peg rail carries its congregation of necessities, cloak, cord, tomorrow's dough, like a wooden spine with memories. You feel the draft at the door seam diminish where your linen plug still stands guard. The small things you did earlier now take your side. It's nice when your own choices become weather in your favor. A thought. If the coals die, you will still wake to cold but not catastrophe. And if dawn comes with only gray ash, you have options. In some places, fire was carried house to house from a neighbor's ember like a traveling blessing. In others, people kept tinder from fungi, amadou scraped from horsehoof fungus, to coax a spark from flint and steel. That, however, is a morning sport. Tonight, your ash blanket hearth is your ember daycare, and you the overprotective nurse. You stand and feel how heat stratifies, warm near the coals, tolerable at the bed, crisp by the door. You move the low stool one hand span closer to the hearth, so your knees don't spend the night writing letters of complaint. You sip the last of the posset and park the cup where morning you can find it by feel. The cup will be eclipsed by darkness in an hour. The hand remembers what the eye forgets. One more round with the bellows, one breath, then none. You listen for the ember murmur's reply. There it is, a faint deeper note from under the ash. Good. You smooth the cover again, anoint the edges with a little extra gray, and give the poker's hook a respectful rest against the trammel. Tools like to sleep properly too. At least that's what you tell yourself, so you'll put them away. You consider placing a larger log on the lip, but veto the idea. Big wood now is morning's lament. You promise the log tomorrow's daylight, and it forgives you in advance. You are becoming the sort of person who schedules with fire. Somewhere, a modern planner pings. You ignore it in solidarity with sanity. You touch the earth floor, cool, honest, and feel how the room holds the day's warmth the way a hand holds a bird, gently, with gaps. The thatch above has stopped creaking. Wind changed its mind or found another roof to interview. You stretch once, quietly, because even your ligaments seem to understand the cottage's rule. No bragging at night. Historians still argue whether families like yours set formal watches by the hearth, one person rousing to tend embers at set hours, or whether the ash bank method meant most could sleep through, waking only when a cold nose or a restless thought tipped the balance. You settle for a compromise. You'll wake once, briefly, to check the gray blanket. Your body, coached by cold and habit, will likely handle the alarm without a clock. Before you leave the hearth, you trace a quick cross in the ash. Piety, muscle memory, or just a way to mark, done. You don't investigate which. You step back, the ember field dim under its cover, and the room grows several shades quieter. Banking isn't just about heat. It is the cottage's way of lowering its voice. You return to your pallet, slide your feet toward the wrapped brick, and let that pocket sunrise bloom along your soles. The warm sees your toes, nods, and keeps walking up your shins. You pull the patched wool to your chin, fold the tip of your nightcap in the traditional turnip style, and smile because the joke is still funny, and also because warmth makes jokes easier. Behind your eyelids, the embers glow at the edge of imagination, small planets under a pale drift. If you wake, you will know where the poker is by its cold iron smell, where the bellows live by the shape your hand expects, where the ash begins by the sound it makes when touched, a soft dry hush like secrets well kept. Morning, when it comes, will find you with coals that remember your name. You shake out the payas like you're waking a friendly haystack that has learned manners. The straw whispers in 100 dry dialects, shifting and settling, each stalk a tiny spring that only wants to poke you out of sentiment, not malice. You lift the sack, coarse linen gone soft with years, then drop it with a low whomp so the chaff migrates away from where hips and shoulders plan to occupy the night. A little dust rises and halos the ember glow. You wave it aside with the seriousness of a conductor cueing the strings. The bed answers with its best impression of a meadow. Mainstream fact. For ordinary medieval households, mattresses were often simple sacks, palasses, filled with straw, reeds, or chaff. Wool-filled ticks existed but cost more, and feathers were for people with better shoes. You work with what most people worked with. Last harvest's stems turned into tonight's springs. Over the payas goes a sheet if you have one. A linen rectangle whose superpower is wicking damp from skin and holding a fragile truce between your body and the straw's opinions. Linen against skin, wool above, the old alliance. You smooth the blanket. Blanket, singular, tries very hard to be plural. It's a mosaic of patches, old cloaks given second careers, felted scraps, squares of homespun stitched so tightly together the seam itself provides insulation. When you pull it up, the blanket exhales a smell of smoke and clean animal, the way a winter coat remembers both weather and shelter. You think about the cloak on the peg rail, still damp at the hem, decide it can audition as an extra layer later, and tell it to rehearse quietly. Shared warmth is the house's favorite math. You roll closer to the person on your left, and they roll closer to the person on theirs, and the row turns into a single long animal that breathes in a tidy rhythm. You've already eaten warmth, pottage, worn warmth, linen and wool, and tucked warmth, brick wrapped in cloth, at your feet. Now you practice warmth by proximity. A body is a furnace that writes poetry in heat units. If you're lucky tonight, even the cat considers a cameo, draping itself along your shins like an opinion that purrs. You tug your long nightcap lower and trap the tip under the blanket again. Turnip mode engaged. Ears are small things that hold surprising amounts of comfort. Your toes discover the wrapped brick, the way a traveler discovers an inn where the keeper knows their name, and announce they will be on excellent behavior from this moment forward. You flex them once, ceremonially, to celebrate the treaty. The bed itself is a contraption of honesty, maybe a frame of rough planks, maybe bedstocks with rope laced back and forth to hold the palas. If you're rope rich, you keep a small peg, a key, to twist the cords taut now and then, so the sack doesn't sag into a hammock with ambitions of becoming a hole. Quirky tidbit. Some say this tightening gives us the phrase, sleep tight, though historians still argue whether the saying is actually that old or just a modern wink thrown backward through time. Tonight, the ropes, if you have them, mutter their creaks like elders trading weather reports and then settle. Before you lie down fully, you perform the straw ceremony. Reach under. Feel for the lump that your ribcage will not forgive, and ferry that lump toward the unused borderlands at the bed's edge. You pat the surface flat the way a baker pats a loaf before the oven. Blessings and geometry. You pull the linen sheet smooth with one broad sweep and then slide under, shoulders first, because dignity is overrated and warmth isn't. The rushlight, trimmed earlier, throws its small almond halo and lets you read the map of men's in the blanket. There's the brown square from a cloak someone wore the winter the cow calved early. There's the paler bit from a shift beyond repair. Every patch is a footnote about past cold nights that did not win. Houses keep those footnotes where they do the most good, pressed against your shins. You and your bedmates negotiate without a word, shoulder to shoulder or back to back. If one of you tends to steal blankets, the others practice preventative diplomacy by wedging the edge beneath an elbow. Family choreography, perfected by repetition, turns a narrow pallet into a system of fairness. A small child, already asleep, emits that honorable farmyard haze of warm milk and straw, and dreams of goats with excellent manners. You inhale that scent and feel your pulse choose a lower tempo. Mainstream fact's cousin, mainstream rhythm, arrives. Many medieval people likely slept segmented, in two stretches with a wakeful interlude between first sleep and second sleep. Historians still argue whether this biphasic pattern was truly universal, varied by latitude and season, or is partly a modern interpretation stitched from scattered texts. Your cottage, meanwhile, doesn't care what scholars name the middle of the night. It calls it the time for checking embers, visiting the pot, saying a prayer, and making sure everyone is still tucked. If you wake then, the bed will be ready to take you back without a fuss, because it practices that welcome every night. On the floor by the bed, a low chest plays three roles: bench by day, step for small legs, and boundary that keeps the payas from wandering. In some homes, a trundle pallet, board and straw on sled-like feet, waits to be pulled out for children or a guest. Hospitality, when you have little, looks like rearranging geography, not conjuring furniture from nowhere. You glance at the space near the byre wall. It holds a softer, cool animal warmth nearby, and you feel grateful for neighbors who breathe hay-scented heat. You remember to fold a bit of cloth over your mouth and nose, not tightly, just a modest scarf against air that would like to draft your breath into unpaid labor. It's an old trick. The cloth gets slightly damp from exhale, then warms itself. Your face stops writing frost poems about the window seam. You wiggle your fingers inside your mitts and find the weave's familiar bump where someone mended a hole with uneven love. Herbs have their say in beds, as well as on floors. Someone once tied a sprig of sweet woodruff into the payas corner. The stem now is more memory than plant. But on kinder nights, when straw is fresh, you sometimes crush a bit of lavender or mint between fingers, and let the scent promote diplomacy between you and the idea of sleep. On crueler nights, the herb is called another blanket, and its scent is later. You take a moment for the town's gossip that isn't gossip. There are rules about who shares beds with whom, and they are enforced mostly by common sense and cold. Siblings tangle like kittens in winter. Married couples have the unromantic privilege of being assigned to the warmest physics. Guests get what geography allows. Bundling boards are a story you've heard about other places and other times. Historians still argue whether such customs were common in medieval villages like yours or mostly later. Regional courtship rituals told with a generous pour of folklore. You choose the scholarly position known as not tonight and keep the blanket over your shoulders. You scratch your ankle, the straw tickles, and then scold yourself, because once scratched, straw will make it a hobby. Lice and fleas exist. Say their names in a whisper so they don't think you're flattering them. Clean linen helps, smoke helps, cool nights help. Nothing solves everything. You do the human thing. Manage, endure, replace straw when grace and time permit. When spring comes, the old payas might turn into garden mulch, an afterlife in carrots. You listen for the house's warm sounds. The ember field under ash sings its low sibilance. The cow adjusts a hoof. The chain clinks a polite punctuation. A mouse reconsiders the rushlights' tallow and files a decision to seek employment elsewhere. The wind gives a limited performance of its favorite monologue, then grows bored. Inside the blanket cave, the air is gentle and belongs to you. You practice the art of stillness that turns body heat efficient. First, the shoulders surrender, then the long back muscles negotiate surrender terms, then your knees agree not to invent projects. You press your calves to the wrapped brick, then move your feet away so the heat can linger without turning bossy. The trick is to let warmth radiate, then trap it with quilt and posture. You become a low flame in human shape. Before you let the rushlight die, you make a last small inspection. The cap's point secured, the blanket tucked under at your hip, the linen flat under your cheek so straw cannot audition as a beard. You pinch the rushlight. The almond flame contracts into a seed and disappears. Darkness swells, but not like a tide, more like a soft curtain drawn by a thoughtful hand. Your eyes accept their retirement package. Someone stirs and settles. The bed shifts by a fraction the way a boat answers a ripple. You hold the image from section 1, the cottages like lamps along a coastline, and trade it for a new one. Beds like coals under ash, families banked against the night. If you wake at the halfway place, the bed will still be here as a waiting meadow. If you don't wake, it will carry you through like a quiet ferry. The blanket smells faintly of wool, smoke, and something that was once rain. Your fingers find their favorite hollow at your collarbone. Your breath learns the bed's cadence. Your thoughts agree to punctuation. Someone, somewhere, is counting chimney pots. Someone else is tracing the dates when chimneys became more common in homes like yours. Historians still argue whether the very bed you lie on would have differed much from century to century or remained stubbornly simple. You grant them their debates and grant yourself the older kindness. Straw, wool, nearness, and the patient mathematics of shared heat. You turn once, quietly, and the payas answers with a friendly crunch that means yes. The house lowers its voice another notch. Your body, that small furnace, keeps working. No spectacle, just useful flame. In a world that offers little drama worth having after dark, that is the most satisfying triumph you can ask of a bed. You dress for bed like someone preparing for a polite expedition to the North Pole that happens to be located 3 feet from your hearth. Linen first, then wool, then whatever dignity survives the sequence. The linen shift, your second skin, slides cool over your shoulders and sighs against the day's sweat. Linen is sorcery that learned manners. It wicks damp away from skin and dries fast. So when the night remembers to be cruel, you don't wake clammy and scolded. Over that goes wool, tunic or kirtle, something plain, honest, and faintly sheepish in both scent and character. If the cold means business, you conscript a cloak as a blanket apprentice. Your reflection in the polished pot says, layered turnip with leadership potential. Accept the promotion. Mainstream fact. Medieval clothing for ordinary folk leans hard on linen next to the skin and wool above it. Even in lowly cottages, the pairing is useful tech. Linen to keep you dry, wool to trap air and warm you with your own weather. You belt the wool layer lightly, because tight belts at night are treaties you regret. Hose pull up your calves like a well-behaved argument. If you're lucky, they meet. If not, the gap is a small frontier that encourages bedtime diplomacy with an extra scrap of cloth. You inspect your mitts. They are not elegant, but then neither is frostbite. Wool mitts are little houses for fingers, with one large room and no ambition to separate anyone. You slide them on and become a practical raccoon. A long nightcap follows, a hood's sleepy cousin, with enough tail to tuck under your blanket so it won't jailbreak at 2 in the morning. You once made the mistake of sleeping capless and woke with ears that could ring church bells. You have since found religion. The cap is non-negotiable. Socks deserve fanfare and get none. If you own knit socks, cherish them. If not, foot wraps, square cloths bound in sensible geometry, turn toes into parcels of optimism. Quirky tidbit. Some households rubbed a whisper of animal fat or lanolin into woolen socks or mitts as a weatherproofing trick. It's hard to be glamorous when your gloves smell faintly of helpful sheep, but glamour has never banked a coal. You check the foot wrap's corners like a captain checking sails, then tuck them into your shoes by the door for morning's cold greeting. Layers are a conversation with air. The goal is not to wear a fortress. You'd only trap sweat and waken the gross province called February in your own shirt. The goal is to stack fabrics so tiny pockets of air settle between them and agree to be warmed by you. Linen tells damp to leave. Wool holds warm like a gentle hoarder. You swing your shoulders, test for friction, and listen to that delicious whisper of cloth on cloth. Your portable insulation system purring. Now the head and neck. The hood with liripipe. The long tail you see on cheerful illuminations. Has a day job outdoors. But indoors a simple cap is easier for pillows and patience. You wrap a length of linen around your throat with the ineffable authority of someone who has invented scarves. Breath warms the cloth. The cloth warms your neck. You stop composing sonnets about drafts. Hands learn quickly that the journey from under blanket to rushlight and back is the most expensive commute of the night. Mitts stay on. A small inventory. Underlayer, linen, overlayer, wool, legs, hose, feet, wraps or socks, head, cap, hands, mitts. Outer cloak within reach for the midnight interlude when the ember calls your name like a shy friend. Your earlier self set a warmed brick at your feet. Your current self thanks them publicly. The brick radiates through the fabric in a slow, steady letter of recommendation addressed to your souls. Historians still argue whether poorer rural households commonly owned separate night clothes or simply slept in day garments loosened and rearranged, and whether true knitted items, stockings, caps, were widespread before knitting's later medieval spread, or replaced by techniques like knot-binding in some regions. You, an expert in the pragmatic school, observe that whatever combination is cleanest and least damp wins. If the linen shift is fresh, you wear it. If not, you turn to the next best idea and promise tomorrow a better laundry day. Laundry, yes. Water is cold, soap is dear, and hands are finite. You hang the day's shirt near, but not over, the banked embers, where smoke lends its anti-pest sermon and warmth finishes what ringing began. On fair days, the wind is your accomplice. On foul nights, smoke is the laundress who never sleeps. You sniff a sleeve with the gravity of a judge. It passes. You find pride in small victories like dry cuffs and no straw down the collar. You tug your belt knot loose so the wool layer can breathe and not carve your middle into weather maps. The cap's tail you capture and pin beneath the blanket in the traditional turnip style. Who knew vegetables had such influence in couture? The mitts you flex, open, close, like a knight testing gauntlets, if knights went to bed at sensible hours. Your shoulders drop one notch further. Your skin stops noticing the air and starts noticing the blanket story. Patch on patch, winter after winter, hands that sewed because sleep demanded it. You consider adding one more layer and decide against it. Too many layers and you'll sweat, then wake cold at second sleep's doorway with a damp shirt and a new grudge. Better to keep the cloak folded at arm's reach and practice the midnight octopus maneuver. Retrieve cloak, deploy over blanket, return to being an intelligent burrito. You rehearse once in your head because you are that kind of person now. There's an art to trapping heat without suffocating it. You lift the blanket a finger's width to let the first warm breath of the brick in your own body rise and spread. Then you retuck the edge along your hip and shoulders, not too tight, not too loose. The mittened hand pats down the seal like a thatcher patting reed. Your nose peeks into the night because it has opinions about air. Your temper humors it. You recall a cousin's advice. Cold rides up from the floor. The earthen floor is generous about sharing its personality. You interpose a folded cloak at calf level where the blanket gaps, a simple bridge across a chill river. Your calves, usually eloquent complainers, offer a grateful silence. You, who once judged blankets only by softness, now judge them by their ability to negotiate microclimates. Light jokes stay small, the way good embers glow without shouting. Your cap has achieved full professor. Your mitts are suddenly very interested in philosophy. Your hose are lobbying for a committee on knee affairs. You snort once and immediately apologize to the blanket cave for the weather. The blanket forgives you. It remembers worse. In the scholarship of clothing, some argue that medieval people didn't wash linen often, or that they didn't own enough of it. Others point to wills, accounts, and stains, the archive no one wanted, to suggest households valued and laundered linen whenever work and season allowed. You adopt the field method. When your nose and the air decide together that a garment is ready for repentance, it repents. You promise the river a spring visit with lye and a beating stone. The river, being a river, does not schedule things but accepts offerings. Your hands, warm now, stray out for a last rushlight pinch and immediately learn the obvious lesson. Mitts off equals cold hands equals regret. You pull them back, wriggle fingers, and let the tallow's almond flame keep a tiny watch from its pin until the ember's low grammar calls for darkness. The cat, promoted to assistant blanket, occupies shins and purrs an excellent baseline for sleep. You settle. Linen whispers, wool holds, brick persuades. Cap keeps the night from nibbling your ears. Outside, frost tries on your door for size and finds it occupied. Inside, you become an obedient physics experiment whose conclusion is layering works. Someone, somewhere, graphs the adoption of chimneys. Someone else dates the spread of knitting. Historians still argue whether your exact outfit would be seen in this parish in this decade. You shrug inside a small climate of your own making. Your college is survival. Your thesis is warmth. Your bibliography is linen and wool. Your eyes go lazy around the ember glow. Your breath finds the cottage's old rhythm again. You are a low, steady fire inside fabrics that know what to do. If midnight comes with its quiet knock, you'll be ready. Cloak at hand, cap loyal, mitts patient, embers banked. For now, you let the layers do their work, and you do the rarest job in winter. Nothing at all. You drift toward the byre wall the way a moth drifts toward a safer moon. The timber here keeps different hours. It holds the low, living warmth of animals. The kind of heat that is not a blaze, not a boast. Just a steady exhale that remembers grass. You press your palm to the plank and feel it answer with a faint barnyard pulse. Congratulations. You have discovered central bovine. Mainstream fact. In large swaths of medieval Europe, people and livestock often shared a roof or at least a wall. Longhouses in parts of Britain, byre-houses in the German-speaking lands, multi-use farmsteads in Scandinavia and beyond, where stalls sat under the same ridge as hearth and bed. Animals were wealth and work, but at night they were also radiators that ate hay. The shared arrangement made chores close, deterred thieves, and, on a ruthless night like this, tilted the temperature a few forgiving degrees in your favor. Your breath, which has been writing a frosty essay all evening, crosses out a sentence. You listen. The cow shifts, hoof to hoof, a gentle geography lesson rendered in hay. A calf makes the small, questioning sound that calves make when a dream has mislaid its mother. Somewhere in the rafters, the chickens negotiate their roosting chart with more politics than a town meeting. That layered warmth, plus the way manure piles outside throw off a slow, composting heat, turns a yard into a pantry of weather. Thermodynamics has dirt under its nails here. You edge your palate closer, enough to borrow warmth, not enough to court hoof. A low board keeps the stall separate. You respect the board like a good treaty. Your wrapped brick, half sun at the feet, teems with the wall's animal glow, and the two climates shake hands under your blanket. You become the beneficiary of a consortium: ember, stone, wool, cow. You can smell the barn-sweet blend of hay, hide, and something that would be rude to name if it didn't pay part of your heating bill. The scent isn't perfume, it is economy. Quirky tidbit. Some folks swear a pig makes a better winter companion than a dog, at least as a foot warmer, though the minutes of that meeting are regrettably absent. Cats, of course, are contract workers who insist their warm laps be paid promptly in attention. Your cat has already invoiced your shins and is waiting by accounts napeable. You picture the animal heat in shapes. A cow is a wide hearth that moves and moos. A cluster of hens is a small, feathery stove stacked vertically on the ladder rungs, every rung a hotter floor in a tiny chicken tenement. Goats are mischievous kettles. Sheep are portable clouds with internal embers. None of these similes show up in the accounts, but your skin understands them immediately. Warmth is a language your nerves already speak. You tuck the blanket higher and listen to the stall breathe. The steady rumen rhythm sounds like a slow tide in a hay-scented ocean. A chain touches wood, plink, then rests. The house, already quiet, lowers its voice for the animal's night. You do the same. Even your mitts attempt to purr. Your ears record a small, important truth. Cold is loud. Warmth is respectful. Mainstream fact makes another appearance. Manure heaps, left to compost properly, rise in temperature as microbes do their invisible harvest. And in tight farmyards, this becomes a predictable winter resource. Nothing you'd nap on, but enough to blunt frost for plants or provide a warmer corner for chores. Some farms even banked dung against outer walls as an insulative apron. Neighbors might tease, but neighbors also borrowed the idea when the wind declared itself mayor. Your yard wears its practicality like a humble badge. You glance up at the rafters and imagine the path smoke takes out through the thatch, curling past the beam ends like a protective spell. The animals don't mind the low haze, their eyes blink, patient, evolved for weather the way your clothes are. Historians still argue whether co-housing with livestock materially worsened health by encouraging disease, or whether, in thin-walled cottages, the modest warmth outweighed risks for many families, especially when combined with smoke's pest-discouraging tendency. The debate is tidy on paper. Your toes, ambassadors from the land of now, present a counter-argument in favor of please a little heat. A chicken, unsure about the politics of gravity, flutters down the ladder, reconsiders, then flutters back. You remember the ladder warning from earlier sections and scoot your pillow an inch, because diplomacy is the blanket you never regret bringing. The hen mutters an opinion that translates roughly as, "It's night. Respect the brand." You agree. You think about space. If a noble's hall is a public river, a peasant's longhouse is a braided stream. Animals and people living parallel currents that sometimes cross and sometimes only sound each other through planks. Shared air is fact. Shared heat is policy. In harsher climates, families sometimes slept directly over the byre in lofts, catching the slow animal tide as it rose. In milder places, a separate byre hugged the house like a warm-backed cousin. The map shifts by parish, purse, and habit, and the past resists a single diagram, like a good cat resists a bath. You reach out and lay a palm flat against the plank again. The warmth there is no fantasy. A living body throws a hearth-sized generosity into the world, because that is what bodies do. Turn food into motion and heat and stories. You thank the cow in a whisper. She answers with a long, thoughtful chew, and then a sigh that wouldn't be out of place in a monastery. Everyone here is practicing a different prayer but toward the same morning. Your mind collects the night's little technologies like beads. Ash over embers, linen against skin, wool above, brick at feet, shutter stuffed, byre wall borrowed. None of these is swagger. Together they make a grammar for surviving cold without breaking the house or the woods. You add one more bead. Don't overdo it. You can inch your palate closer to the wall and gain warmth. You can also wake to a curious muzzle sniffing your ear and decide you've taken networking too far. Moderation is the mitten of wisdom. A mouse performs a recon mission along the stallboard, pauses when it smells cat resume, and files a change of plans with remarkable speed. The cat does not wake but looks more asleep, which is an advanced technique. You permit yourself a small smile and then stash it for later. Smiling uses muscles, and muscles burn fuel you'd rather save for chores at dawn. You think, briefly, academically, about the way people measure heat now in neat units, then abandon the math. Here, the unit is hand on plank and breath under blanket, and the number of jokes the cap can survive. 3. Apparently. Your cap has graduated from turnip to turnip emeritus, and you thank it for its service. The wool at your neck learns your shape and stops negotiating. You drift, but the drift is local. The ember field under ash remembers your earlier care and hums its quiet note. The byre wall keeps its promise of animal warmth without asking you to clap. The wind outside tries the latch and goes away to write a poem about rejection. Inside, your body files updates, toes, improving, nose, borderline but optimistic, ears, content, eyebrows, considering hibernation, all systems warming. If you wake at the halfway place between first and second sleep, this corner will still be here. The cow will stand and turn, scribing a soft circle of sound. The hens will rearrange their committee chairs. You will check the ash and feel for the glow under gray. You may even murmur a blessing, whichever one your house recognizes, to thank the small engines that got you to intermission. Embers, linen, wool, brick, animals. Historians still argue whether such wakes were prayerful pauses or just practical maintenance stops. Your version will be both, because gratitude multitasks. For now, you set the cloak within reach in case the air auditions for stricter roles, and you angle the pallet so the wall's heat falls along your spine like a friendly hand. Your breath slows to the barn's rhythm. The cat hums. The cow dreams of summer bells and forgets winter for a minute. You, warmer by inches and therefore miles, release the day and bank yourself under sleep the way you banked the fire. No spectacle, all intention, quiet victory. You learn the kind of warmth you can pour into a bowl. The ember field hums under ash. The byre wall lends its quiet animal exhale. But tonight your real furnace sits in your stomach and calls itself supper. You tip the pipkin and watch Pottage think about being a river. It moves reluctantly. Barley thickened into a geography. Leeks and onions making green commas. A shred of salted pork giving an opinion from the far bank. Heat rides the steam like soft advice. You cup the bowl, and it sits in your palms like a tame sun. Mainstream fact. For most medieval country folk, daily fuel was bread, pottage, a stew porridge halfway place, and ale, sometimes milk, sometimes cheese, seasonal vegetables, with meat in modest cameo unless feast, luck, or status said otherwise. The warmth you feel is not literary, it is caloric economics. You eat heat for later. Over the hearth's shoulder a second pot mutters, oats for morning, a promise you can sleep on. You tear a heel of coarse bread and float it like a small boat. Sops, they're called. Pieces meant to soak up broth. Good manners for a bowl that has done honest work. The crust softens, goes glossy, and then disappears, which is also your plan. You drink the last of last night's ale posset, milk and ale warmed with whatever spice smugglers have allowed your parish to meet, and feel that small internal hearth put on a second log. A faint clove whisper fakes wealth. You permit the illusion. One joke, soft as steam. Somewhere, a future cookbook will call this a nightcap. You are calling it my central heating bill. You scrape the spoon along the bowl's inside and listen to the little brass singers. Porridge makes a music all its own. Pita, pita, pita. A percussion section no choir ever asked for and every stomach respects. The rushlight throws an almond flame on your knuckles. Your fingers thaw and remember politer adjectives for winter. You swallow, pause, and can name the precise moment warmth leaves your tongue, descends your throat, and spreads into the cold neighborhoods around your ribs where real estate prices recently plummeted. Quirky tidbit. Some households keep what we'd now call a perpetual stew on the go. Pottage that never entirely ends, only renews. Each day another ladle of water, another handful of barley or peas, a carrot, an onion, a scrap of yesterday's luck, until the pot is also a family archive. Is that common everywhere? Historians still argue whether perpetual is pious legend or practical habit confined to kitchens with steady fuel and steady mouths. But your ladle tonight dips into something with a memory longer than your mitts. You fold in a turnip, diced like 100 white cubes of humility. The knife squeaks on the board the way snow squeaks under a cruel morning. Salt pinched from the little crocks tastes sharper in weather like this. Salt has opinions about survival. In summer you might hesitate. Tonight you season like a person who shakes hands through gloves. You crush a bit of leek between your fingers and let its green breath argue with the smoke. Your nose votes for edible poem. Bread stands for a kingdom by itself. On rich days it's wheat. On most days it's rye. Barley, maslin, a mix, or oats. The crust is armor. The crumb is cloud. You dip again, and the broth thickens into something that negotiates with your hunger like a skilled clerk. Not now, but soon. If you have cheese, you shave it and watch it stripe the pottage, melting into patience. If you have only the shape of cheese in your memory, you grate that instead, and pretend. Your stomach, pragmatic, thanks you either way. The ale is small, low alcohol, high safety, brewed for thirst and health because water sometimes brings unwelcome guests to dinner. You drink it like you drink daylight, grateful, without commentary. Somewhere a sermon warns about drunkenness. Somewhere else a steward warns about bad wells. Tonight you honor both by keeping your cup modest and your water boiled. If luck sent a sprig of rosemary or sage your way, you float it for the scent alone and call it medicine to keep the doctor from charging you for the name. Mainstream fact again. Clergy calendars with fast and fish days shaped diets as much as seasons did, and the line between medicine and spice was often a ribbon that curved with fashion and purse. Historians still argue whether rural diets were chronically deficient or surprisingly adequate across the year. Grain quality, availability of fats, and the rhythm of feast and famine reshaping the answer by parish and century. Your answer tonight is more specific. This bowl is enough. This warmth is convincing, and you'll deal with theories when your toes stop writing angry letters to your shins. You ladle out a spoonful for the child who is assembling a quilt from yawns. The bowl is big in small hands. The steam writes a soft fog on sleepy eyelashes. You blow across the surface and watch little ripples run shore to shore. The cat, committed to contrarianism, pretends not to care until the spoon clinks the rim, then auditions for the role of official smell inspector general. You deny the appointment. Scandal rocks the feline press. A neighbor knocks. 3 polite raps that sound like the wind remembering manners. You pour a wooden cup of hot caudle, grain-thickened spiced drink, and pass it through the cracked door with all the ceremony of a royal writ. She thanks you with a news bulletin about the frozen lane and returns to her cottage carrying steam like a lantern. Heat shared is not heat lost. Your room keeps its blessing and grows more itself. You bar the door again, and the house resumes its favorite shape. Bowl, glow, quiet. You take the spoon to the bottom of the pot and retrieve the resident survivals. A barley pearl that escaped. An onion piece that tried to retire early. A stubborn strip of pork that believed in afterlives. You welcome them back to the economy. Each mouthful is a lesson. Fuel should be slow burning, not flashy. Heat in the belly does hours of unphotogenic good. Supper should leave you ready to sleep, not argue with your duvet. You do not own a duvet. You own a heroically patched blanket. But the joke lands anyway. On the trivet, a small pan warms stones again for feet. You stir with the poker's cool end. Your spoon stayed honest and clean, and tap the rim 3 times, the kitchen's old spell for thank you, disguised as a habit. The steam fogs your fringe. Your nightcap decides to imitate a weather vane. You accept the fashion development. The mitts have sauce on them now, which is technically against their union rules, but warmth pays the fine. You think ahead to morning. The oat pot will keep its place near the embers. The first stir will loosen it into something kind. A scrap of apple, if saved, will turn the porridge into a rumor of celebration. You imagine the first spoon, the way it will draw heat up your throat like a string through beads, and how that heat will turn stubborn chores possible. Breaking ice in the bucket, coaxing flame from red, pushing the door open against a drift's opinion. Food is the rehearsal for courage. Another small joke, because the house likes them. The rushlight flame looks like an almond, and you decide to name it marzipan, which is ridiculous and therefore good. Marzipan nods, a confectionery saint of patience, and then gets on with the humble work of light. Your spoon clinks a last time. The acoustic signature of enough. You wipe the bowl with the last bread. No crumbs for mice, no waste for regret. Outside, the wind tries to write its name on your shutter. Inside, the stew writes yours on your ribs and signs it warm. Historians still argue whether the phrase, "a hot meal is half a blanket," belongs to any one century, or simply to people who have ever lived near winter. You file it under true. You bank the embers again, tuck the pot to the side where it will keep a ghost of heat and not sulk, and set a lid so ashes don't join the recipe uninvited. The room smells like barley, onion, and victory. You carry the small hot stone bundle to the bed, a portable punctuation mark for the sentence you're about to lie down inside. Your stomach hums a low vowel of gratitude, and your shoulders decide to cooperate with gravity. When you finally slide under the blanket, the warmth you ate opens its quiet umbrella from the inside. Feet greet stone, linen greets skin, wool greets air and takes it hostage nicely. The world outside can practice being January. You, inside, practice being enough. Sleep comes faster when you've convinced your core that the night is not an exam. You have fed your fire. Now your fire keeps you. You go hunting for the enemy you can't see but can always feel on your neck. Drafts are small thieves, petty criminals with perfect timing, so you stalk them with the patience of a cat whose union card is currently asleep on your shins. The house helps. It tells on its own leaks. A rushlight flame that leans with opinions. A cold thread along your ankle bone. A straw stalk suddenly ambitious enough to rattle. You move slowly, mitts on, and make the rounds. Start with the shutter. You press your palm to the seam and there it is. A hair-thin river of January cutting through oak. You pack in twists of moss, a ribbon of linen, and a dab of daub from the repair pot. The way a baker seals a pie against nosy air. The bar drops with that honest wooden consonant the cottage likes. Shh, says the house. And the wind, spurned, goes to insult a different wall. You smooth the oiled linen that stands in for glass here. Feel how it deadens the cold and admits a tired ghost of light. Mainstream fact. For many medieval cottages, glass panes are dear dreams. Shutters, oiled cloth, and in some places thin horn plates supply the window's work, while small openings trade daylight for heat. Your shutter is mostly policy disguised as wood. Next, the door. The hinge creaks a rumor. You listen with your fingertips. Drafts don't rush, they insinuate. You kneel and feed the gap a plaited rag snake, door draft stopper in the ancient language of what can we sew from scraps. It settles into its new job with the solemn air of a clerk given a ledger. You touch the latch string hole, tied inside, because hospitality has hours and this is not one, and wedge a twist of wool into its gossiping circle. Your wrist reports a temperature change from pond to puddle. Progress. You stand under the smoke's path and perform the feather test. A loose hen feather, liberated during yesterday's roost negotiations, floats in your breath, then drifts where the smoke takes it. The plume shows a lazy highway toward the roof. Good. The ash bank you made keeps flames civil. The smoke rises to the high dark like incense that forgot the sermon. Quirky tidbit. Some households hang cobweb curtains in neglected corners on purpose, not out of love for spiders, but because the webs whisper when drafts slip by. Their early warning banners spun by 8-legged building inspectors. You don't evict today's inspector. She's on your side, strictly speaking. You adjust the rushlight so its almond flame stands plumb. It has been leaning, a tiny weather vane tattling on the door seam. You trim the char with a careful pinch. The tallow smell is not a perfume. It's a polite fence for mice and a reminder that light and heat both begin as a smell before they become comfort. You lift your eyes toward the rafters. The smoke bay above the hearth. No true chimney, just a framed space that persuades smoke to collect and drift out. Holds its sleepy cloud. Mainstream fact. Many modest houses spent long centuries with open hearths and smoke bays or roof vents. Built chimneys, when they arrive unevenly, first in wealthier or urban settings, and then by slow repair crawl into rural frames. Historians still argue whether your parish saw proper stacks sprout in this exact century or a few decades later, and whether low country habits traveled here as fast as people claim. Your lungs present the practical view. Less sting tonight than last frost, more sting than none. Acceptable exchange for warmth and a roof that dries itself. You study the thatch underside where it meets the smoke. It's black-glossed and patient, cured like ham made of grass. Smoke discourages pests that would snack the roof to lace, and it draws damp out of reed and straw. In the ledger of losses and gains, you count this a win. You also count the cough you get if you fuss the embers too proud. Balance is the old arithmetic. Ash over coals, coals under patience. At the wall post you find a hairline crack you missed earlier. An invitation to tiny weather. You thumb it full of clay and chopped straw mash, the way you've thumbed a dozen others, and the drafts whisper quits. Your thumb holds up a small victorious smear. The cat opens one eye like a magistrate approving a minor law, and then resumes being art. You award yourself a quiet joke. You are now a licensed practitioner of anti-wind medicine, specialty mud. You ease back toward the hearth to check the smoke's manners. The bellows get a single breath, just to remind the red under ash that you still believe in it. The ash lifts and settles, a gray eyelid that blinks once. The smoke keeps its lazy column and does not fold back into the room. You approve. The cottage approves. The cat pretends to have suggested that. Doorposts drink cold as if it were gossip, so you add a wedged slat at floor level where the sill has bowed with age. A folded scrap of wool goes under the latch where wood clacks wood. Remember the cloak you kept for emergencies? You hang it on the peg nearest the door, not as fashion but as insulation. Cloth makes poor walls but excellent filler. The cloak lends its years to the cause. You run your knuckles along the jamb, and the bite is gone. Mainstream fact again. Many households used rushes or straw on floors, not just for cleanliness, but to soften chill. Renewed periodically, in theory. The layer could also draft-proof the step from bed to hearth. Historians still argue whether city preachers exaggerated the old rush's filth for sermon drama, or whether country floors truly fermented into legends. Your floor tonight is honest dirt with a modest scatter. Your bare feet will thank even that small mercy in the morning when they negotiate with ice under the bucket. Smoke is part heat, part health lecture spoken in a rasp. Some swear by herbs on the floor, sweet woodruff, lavender, mint, not only for scent, but because certain leaves invite fewer crawlers. You crumble a pinch and scatter it like a private festival. The smell rises, shakes hands with wood smoke, and the two decide to get along. The child on the pallet breathes it and turns without waking. The cat sneezes exactly once and pretends it meant to do that. You return to the window and lay your ear to the shutter, because hearing drafts sometimes works better than feeling them. Wind plays flute at the edges. Your new packing turns the song into a tired hum. You test the iron hook holding the shutter closed. Firm, pious, unlikely to repent at 3 in the morning. You whisper to it anyway. Objects like compliments and flattery cost nothing but a breath. Your nose reminds you that smoke has agendas. In wetter weather it sulks and spirals back into the room. In drier, colder snaps it climbs like someone sure of a ladder you can't see. You've learned the trick of opening the door a hand's width for a count of 10. A controlled invitation that gives the hearth a gulp of clean air so it can remember which way is up. The cat glares at the draft, files a grievance, and withdraws it when you close the door again. Union satisfied. You hang a spare cloth, light, not suffocating, like a little valance above the bed edge. A domestic windbreak you've invented twice this week and will claim you always knew. The room's climate zones adjust. Warm near hearth, milder by bed, merely crisp at door. You feel like a cartographer of comfort, mapping tiny continents of bearable air. Quirky tidbit number 2. Some families taught their children to listen to corners. A game that's really training. Put an ear to each corner and name what you hear. Windy corner, quiet corner, animal corner, prayer corner near the hearth. You try it, grown as you are, and find the game still works. It teaches your body where to sleep, where to mend, where to set the bowl. Historians still argue whether such folk rules belong to your century or arrived later stitched into printed chapbooks. Your house doesn't consult chapbooks. It consults your skin. You take stock, shutter wedged, door stuffed, latch tightened, cloak employed, floor modestly softened, smoke going up, ash blanketing heat. The rushlight settles to an obedient almond. Your jokes have stayed small so as not to start a wind. The byre wall keeps that quiet, living warmth. The feather has retired. The spider is back on payroll. The draft snake lounges at its post like a hero who prefers naps. You slide under the blanket and feel the room's tone drop. A literal hush as the drafts fail to find you. Your nose still meets winter, but a polite version. The kind that asks before it sits. You angle the cap just so, turnip doctorate. Curl your mitts, and let the air over your face remain cool enough to keep you real and warm enough to keep you kind. Outside, the wind mispronounces your house's name and gives up. Inside, you have tamed enough smoke and chased enough drafts to earn first sleep without bargaining. If you wake midway, you'll make another circuit. 2 fingers at the ash, 1 breath with the bellows, a pat to the shutter. But for now, the cottage is a held note. Not loud, not thin, just true. You keep it company with your breathing, which has learned the tune. You graduate from body as furnace to carry heat like a courier. The hearth has done its part. The byre wall lends animal breath, but there's a special comfort in smuggling a pocket of warmth directly into the cold geography of the bed. You start with the classic, a brick. Not any brick, dry, tight-grained, free of cracks that pretend to be personality. You set it near, not in, the ember heart, on the trivet's edge where heat writes letters slowly. Overheat it, and it becomes a lecture. Warm it right, and it becomes a lullaby with corners. Test the brick the way grandmothers test wisdom, with the back of your hand. If your skin votes hiss, it's too hot. Wrap it in a folded bit of linen, and then another. Double wrapping keeps the cloth from scorching and the heat from sprinting away. Slip the bundle to the bed's foot. Not under your heel like a prank, but against your calves like a treaty. In a minute, your toes send you a postcard. Arrived safely. Wish you were feet. Mainstream fact. Across medieval and early modern Europe, households used hot objects, heated bricks, baked stones, earthenware bottles, even slabs of soapstone, as bed warmers and foot warmers. The famous lidded brass warming pan, carrying live coals, becomes common in later centuries and wealthier homes, but the logic is older and humbler. Heat a dense thing, wrap it, borrow its loyalty. You have soapstone if your parish geology's kindly. If not, any dense rock that doesn't crack under fire will volunteer. You reward volunteers with a slower, safer warm, and a dignified retirement under the blanket. You experiment with a footstone, a flattish slab you heat and then slide beneath the blanket edge where your shins negotiate peace with the night. Stones excel at steady humility. They do not brag. They do not leap into flame. They do not write your thatch a goodbye note. Your mitts learn the choreography. Tongs to trivet, stone to cloth, cloth to bed, bed to ah. The cat, a credentialed heat critic, relocates to the neighborhood of your ankles and declares the installation a success by purring until the mattress vibrates like a distant hive. Then, there's the glamorous cousin with a reputation, the bedpan. Not the chamber pot, different hero, different story. But the lidded pan, iron or brass, with a long handle, built to carry hot coals between sheets for a quick, darting tour of duty. You've seen one at the Reeves house, polished like the moon. You also watched his wife glide it back and forth across linen as if painting warmth on with a careful brush. This tool is fast, but fast can be foolish. Coals mean sparks, and sparks mean, hello, bucket line. Quirky tidbit. People sometimes filled cloth bags with cherry stones or sand, heated them by the hearth, and used them as hand or foot warmers. The stones hold heat kindly, smell faintly like dessert when warm, and do not stage dramatic exits. Somewhere a future generation will invent a copper hot water bottle and call it modern. You, meanwhile, pour politics into a clay bottle, cork it tight, wrap it in cloth, and tuck it by your ribs where courage lives. Safety has a liturgy, and you say it out loud. Ash smothers. Sand is honest. Keep a pot of each by the hearth like two quiet deacons. Never walk a coal pan over straw. Never leave heated metal in beds while you fetch more fuel. Never test with bare fingers because curiosity and blister are cousins. You clear a path with your eyes before your hands move. You keep the ember bucket outside the door, not jauntily under the peg rail. The cottage approves. It is, after all, made of opinions that burn. You try the warming pan once, just to learn the difference between speed and sense. You lift the lid, spoon a minimal scoop of red into the belly, cover it, and hold the long handle like a knight's lance made of caution. You pass it briskly over the sheet, never lingering, drawing quick, warm stripes like you're ironing the night. You listen for the perilous hiss that means cloth is complaining. You hear none. You stop anyway because victory likes small portions. When you hang the pan back on its nail, the relief that leaves your neck is a lesson. Stones are slower, but don't ask you to practice heroics before bed. Mainstream fact again, in the Low Countries and parts of Northern Europe, people used portable foot stoves, little wooden boxes with a pan of coals inside, to keep feet from becoming legends in church pews and winter rooms. Whether you'd find one in a cottage like yours, this century, in this parish, is a question scholars underline, bold, and argue about in the margins. Historians still argue whether coal-carrying gadgets were common in rural households before later periods, or whether humbler, ember-free methods, hot stones, earthenware, wrapped bricks, remained the peasant standard far longer than tidy museum labels suggest. Your bed votes for the standard that doesn't make the rushlight hold its breath. You add a tiny ritual. Rub a whisper of fat into the linen wrapper for the stone. Lanolin. If you can coax a bit from fleece washing, so the cloth doesn't scorch and the heat gentles outward. The fabric darkens to a shy gloss and smells faintly of helpful sheep. You apologize to glamour and accept the warmth. Glamour wasn't coming over in this weather anyway. Joke 1, politely warmed. You warm your mitts by rubbing them briskly, then lay them over the stone for a count of 20, not to heat the hands so much as to persuade the wool to stop being a snowdrift and start being a climate. You discover the sweet spot where the stone's halo reaches your calves without bossing your knees. You mark it, invisibly, on the sheet. Tomorrow you will find it again by instinct. Tonight you feel very clever and the blanket agrees, which is the only vote that matters. A small bucket stands near, the water butt's younger cousin. You keep it for splashes and for the fanciful hope that you'll never need it. The village well froze in the last great frost for a week, and everyone learned the sculptural properties of ice in buckets. You learned that keeping even a ladleful inside saves cursing later. You set the bucket where you won't trip it in the dark, because nothing tests a friendship with warmth like a surprise underfoot. The ember bed gets a last, loving tuck of ash, so your warmers have a steady charging station if you wake. Ash is your nighttime thermostat, and your insurance policy against the thatch becoming a shooting star. You set the bellows within reach, handle crossed like a sleeping bird, and the poker with its hook turned inward, so you won't snag a blanket edge and invite slapstick. The cat swivels an ear at the word slapstick, decides you are unworthy of theater, and resumes purr. You recall a neighbor's cautionary tale, their cousin's cousin who left a coal pan in sheets and woke in the courtyard, watching a perfect column of sparks translate a roof into memory. You don't know if the story is entirely true. It functions as truth anyway. In a village like yours, the water chain is everyone's midnight sport when someone gets cocky. Better a slow stone than a fast mistake. Joke 2, cooled to common sense. You rotate tonight's stone out at the halfway wake. The first has given its best. The second takes up the job with that dignified silence stones do so well. You make the swap like a stagehand in the dark. Practiced, unseen, crucial. Your feet greet the new sunrise under the blanket with missionary zeal. You whisper thanks to whoever first thought to heat a rock and sleep on it. Invention often looks like obviousness with a birthday. Historians still argue whether the poorest households could spare even the fuel for luxury warmers on bad years, or whether the warmer was simply the nearest family member's shins. The record is a quilt stitched from manorial accounts, sermons, wills, and the stubborn quiet of ordinary rooms. Tonight your account says you had enough embers for a stone, enough cloth to wrap it, and enough caution to keep the house you live in from becoming a headline in church gossip. You slide down until your calves find that marked warmth line, fold the cap's tail into its turnip tuck, and let the wool drape so heat doesn't flee at the collar. Your hands, finally unimportant, retire inside mitts. Your breath writes small clouds that break on the linen and vanish. The stone undercloth holds its vow. You have brought a piece of hearth to the geography of sleep and taught it to behave. Joke 3. A yawn. Congratulations on your promotion to nighttime thermal engineer. Benefits include toes. The cottage settles one more notch. Outside, frost rehearses a glitter it will perform at dawn. Inside, a wrapped stone hums. An ember field waits its cue. A cat drafts your ankles, and you, well layered, well taught, let the night continue without you for a while. You learn to read the night like a farmer reads a ledger, not for poetry, but for consequences. Step outside the door, just a hand's width, cloak tight, and tilt your face toward the winter sky. There, a pale ring around the moon, a ghostly halo stroking the stars. You breathe, and the air bites back politely. A folk rule steps forward, clears its throat. A ring round the moon means snow soon. You file the note somewhere between hen lays early and cat stares fixedly at nothing for 10 minutes. The heavens keep a weather diary. You practice sounding out the letters. Back in, latch down, breath steady. You speak softly to the embers and then to the room, because words make warm company. This is the hour for signs, saints, and the small superstitions that hold the night together when logic has gone to bed. You draw a tiny ash cross above the hearth. Habit, hope, and maybe a way of telling the flames you'd like them to remain politely domestic. The soot takes the mark like an old friend shaking hands. Mainstream fact. The church calendar threads through winter like twine. Advent candles against the longest nights. St. Nicholas and gift customs in early December. Epiphany chalk over door lintels in some places. Candlemas on February 2nd with candles blessed for storms and sickbeds. Households hoarded those blessed tapers like bottled courage. When thunder bullied the thatch or illness prowled the bed, a stub of sanctified wick was light with manners. You've seen a stub once, beeswax gone brown with age, flame steady in weather that would fray lesser light. It's not magic, you tell yourself. And then you add, gently, that you wouldn't mind if it were. You listen for omens that belong to farmyards. Crows low, weather near, smoke that drops and sulks, snow rehearsing, frost ferns thicker than lace on the shutter seam. A day for doubled mitts and tripled patience. The cat abandons your ankles to sit facing the door, as if expecting a guest you can't see. You decide the guest is tomorrow. A light joke helps the room hush. If the cat is forecasting, you'll accept subscriptions later. The cat blinks once. Paid content. You touch the doorpost where a daisy wheel has been carved. A little compass flower scratched into the wood by somebody with a steady hand and a need for comfort. A patrapaic mark. The priest calls such things when he isn't scowling. Turn evil away, confuse the wandering eye, give mischief something to chase in circles until morning. A nail holds an old horseshoe, ends up for luck that won't spill, iron for warding because iron is the village bouncer of metals. You straighten it with 2 fingers and decide luck counts as insulation when it's all you have left to add. On the peg by the bed hangs a hagstone, a pebble laced by nature with a hole. You keep it for the same reason you keep mended mitts. You have seen nights that eat certainty for breakfast. You rub the stone's edge and tell yourself it's the sea's work, not witchery, and then you tuck it back because either way you sleep better knowing it swings there. Quirky tidbit. Some folk string hagstones to stable keys, so nightmares will find the hole and pass through it rather than press on the sleeper's chest. Horses, being pragmatic poets, approve anything that promises fewer bad dreams. You turn to the saints like colleagues with particular portfolios. Saint Blaise guards throats. You promise him you'll keep your scarf on. Saint Agatha is fire's manager. A little roll of bread blessed on her day is supposed to help keep kitchens from staging tragedies. Saint Bridget belongs to the hinge of winter and spring. Her cross of rushes, if you can still find a greenish stem, waits above the door like an announcement of future thaw. Your piety is ordinary and practical. You prefer miracles that look like woven reeds in warm soup. Weather has proverbs the way houses have beams. Red sky at morning, shepherd's warning. When the wind's in the east, 'tis neither good for man nor beast. Some sayings contradict each other on principle, like cousins who both want the last slice of bread. You repeat the ones that fit the night and let the others nap. Historians still argue whether such lines in your parish are truly medieval, later printed folklore pushed backward, or a river of sayings constantly braided and rebraided by mouths that work fields by day and stories by dark. You follow the older rule. If it keeps you cautious, keep it. The rushlight, marzipan, you named it 2 sections ago, wavers, then steadies, an almond flame performing a saint's poise without a saint's paperwork. You trim its char to keep the light clean. Smoke behaves better when wicks mind their manners. You set the little brass holder near a chalk mark on the table where you swear the light glows warmest. Whether that's physics or superstition, the glow does not file a rebuttal. The cat approves, which is, in this house, a peer review. Someone taught you to watch animals for weather. Cows face away from a blow before you feel it. Hens roost lower on stubborn nights, a feathery concession to cold. Dogs curl into tucks that turn them into punctuation marks against drafts. You add your own sign. When the child's toes migrate toward your warmed stone in sleep, expect frost hard enough to argue with buckets. Prognostic science in here is a braid, breath, fur, ash, and a little prayer that prefers not to fill out forms. You finger the chalk lines over the doorframe, C plus M plus B with the year tucked beside, inscribed at Epiphany by the priest's hand or your own, depending on who was making rounds. Christ bless this house, or if you grew up hearing the other story, the initials of the Magi, Caspar, Melchior, Balthazar. The chalk will fade, as chalk does, but for now it draws a pale fence words can sit on. When thunder shakes its chain over the ridge, you imagine the line glows like a spider's thread catching dew. Whether it does is a question for braver eyes than yours at midnight. You remember an older neighbor who swears by beeswax tapers to talk smoke upward during storms. She lights one. Then 3. Then 1 again, counting in a rhythm learned from her grandmother, which may be theology or merely the memory of a kitchen where counting soothed frightened hands. You have a tallow rushlight, not fine wax. You count anyway and feel your breath obey the numbers. Some rituals are metronomes first, and miracles later. Not all signs live in the sacred column. There's bread turned upside down. Don't tempt hunger. There's spinning after dark. Don't snag luck. There's whistling in a doorway. Call wind you cannot pay. You pick and choose with the pragmatism of someone whose blanket is finite. You turn the loaf right side up, just in case, and find you like the way the crust looks like a small brown roof. Bread as architecture. Architecture as bread. Your stomach, recently educated by Pottage, applauds. You step to the door and listen. The wind has downgraded itself from sermon to grumble. You sniff, ice and distance, and decide the moon's ring was telling the truth. Snow is likely. You rub your thumb over the horseshoe, then the daisy wheel, then the chalk, then the ash cross, iron, line, soot, the tactile litany of do what you can, then sleep. You are not in charge of clouds. You are in charge of wedges at the shutter seam and coals tucked respectfully to last till dawn. The saints will understand division of labor. Mainstream fact again. Candlemas brings a weather rhyme that pretends to foretell the rest of winter. If Candlemas Day be fair and bright, winter will have another flight. If Candlemas Day be clouds and rain, winter is gone and will not come again. Many parishes repeat some version, many winters ignore it. You will still eye the sky on that day. Because sky watching is free, and people like to pretend the world is polite enough to drop hints. You put the hagstone back on its peg and smile at how much your house has become a museum of useful hope. Iron to ward, marks to confuse, chalk to bless, reeds to remember spring, candles to steady breath, sayings to give the mind something to hold besides the dark. Historians still argue whether medieval villagers were ruled by superstition, or simply armed with a wide toolkit of sense, custom, and prayer braided together. From inside your blanket, the braid feels like rope across a river. You make a last round with mitts and cap, turnip doctorate secured, and settle under the patched mosaic that understands loyalty. You whisper a line you can't remember learning, something about angels at four corners and a roof that remembers summer. The cat relocates to your calves, an Amen with whiskers. Outside, the moon's halo goes on reading itself in the high cold. Inside, your small liturgies, learned or invented, bank the mind the way ash banks the coal. When sleep comes, it finds you busy doing the oldest magic, paying attention, then closing your eyes. You decide that sleep can wait 10 patient minutes while usefulness has its turn. The ember field hums under ash. Marzipan, the rushlight, holds its little almond pose. Your mitts flex like stage hands. Night tasks, small and repetitive, make a different kind of warmth. The kind you can wear tomorrow, the kind you can eat in a week, the kind that turns worry into thread. You settle on the low stool with a basket of flax and the spindle you trust like a familiar tool ghost. The distaff, a stick with a modest tuft of prepared flax, leans against your shoulder. You tease out fibers with your fingers, twist, and let the spindle take the twist down into a growing cord of potential. The spindle whirl, a disc of clay or stone, keeps the spin honest, gravity as partner. Mainstream fact: before spinning wheels spread across Europe, the simple great wheel shows up by the late Middle Ages, unevenly by region. Most yarn for ordinary households was drop-spun with distaff and spindle. Miles of thread per garment meant hours upon hours each season. Tonight, you contribute inches to a future sleeve. Inches hide inside minutes the way warmth hides inside ash. The flax feels like hair with manners. Your fingers learn its grain, pulling fibers to the width of an honest thread. Not proud, not stingy. Twist, draw, wind, repeat. The rhythm asks for a song you don't need to sing out loud. Your breath hums a nonsense lullaby that's 80% meter and 20% memory. The child on the pallet answers by not waking. The cat suggests a counter melody, purr in D minor, and the room becomes a choir that never auditions. You turn the spindle once more and glance at the lamp. Marzipan has developed ideas about leaning. You reset the rush in its clip. 2 slivers of iron that pinch the pith just so. Then nib the charred end with a thumbnail. Quirky tidbit: households often burned rushlights horizontally in little clamps called rush nips, or propped them at angles to control speed. Too steep, and the fat runs. Too flat, and the flame sulks. There's an art to a good, even burn that makes you feel like a pyrotechnic librarian. You return to spinning, and the lamp approves by not being dramatic. The thread you are making is thin, and a little proud of being thin. You thicken it deliberately for the part that will be cuffs. Cuffs suffer the world. The spindle, now heavy with what used to be plant and now is argument, needs winding. You pause, wind on, and feel the new yarn relax around the shaft like a snake deciding to be domesticated. You imagine the future of this yarn, looped into cloth on a warp-weighted loom or a simple frame. Later perhaps mended. Later perhaps patching a blanket that has already saved your toes 3 winters in a row. Mending enters the chat. You set the spindle aside and retrieve the shirt whose elbow has an ambition to be a window. Your bone needle, smooth, loyal, slides through linen with a tiny whisper. You work a darn that crosses the hole first one way, then the other, thread-making scaffolding where cloth gave up. The patch is not invisible. It is a badge that says someone cares about elbows. You turn the sleeve and add 3 small holding stitches where tomorrow's workload would begin another escape. Your jokes stay small. You tell the elbow to behave. The elbow says it is a professional and refuses to comment. Mainstream fact again. Rushlights, rush pith dried and dipped in tallow, were a poor household's common lighting, cheap but smoky. Each small length burning perhaps 15 minutes depending on fat and angle. Candles of beeswax were costly, saved for ritual or better rooms. Historians still argue whether rural evenings were usually dim, with work done just in hearth glow, or whether houses commonly kept multiple rushes going for hours. Accounts vary by purse, season, and sermon. Tonight you burn one and move it with you like a tiny moon. It is enough. You shell dried peas into a bowl. The clatter a soft, homely rain. Hands learn the knack. Thumb pressure, twist, pop. A rhythm that lets your mind visit tomorrow's pot without leaving the room. A few peas attempt escape. The cat pounces with a professionalism that would be admirable if it weren't so wrong. You negotiate a ceasefire. Peas are not mice. The cat pretends to take minutes. You accept a world where everyone is a little bit theatrical. In the other bowl sit barley grains awaiting a short roast on the trivet so they'll grind sweeter tomorrow. You spread them in a thin layer, stir, sniff for the moment when the smell turns from grass to toast. Tiny thunder pops as a kernel protests. You jump. The cat registers the pop as an act of war against shins and relocates to your lap for defensive purring. The barley darkens one shade. You lift it off, the pan murmuring its score against iron. You notice a broken pot handle and decide the pot is not done serving. You drill 2 tiny holes with a heated awl and loop wire from the nothing is trash jar to fashion a new grip. The pot looks surprised, then pleased. You like working in the hour when tools act more like characters and less like things. Your mitts, retired to your pockets while fingers work, mutter enviously. You promise them a warm-up on the brick in a minute. A spool of thread made this winter, coarser, dyed with onion skins to a modest gold. Waits for edges that need binding. You reinforce the cloak's hem where snow chews. The cloak tells you the story of last week's hedgerow via burrs entombed in the seam. You evict the freeloaders and decide that if saints invented patience, they probably learned it darning. Joke 1. You consider putting tailor on your resume. Then remember your resume is the pile of mended things already keeping the house from mutiny. Your eye lands on the distaff again. If you had a simple wheel, the great wheel some neighbors whisper has arrived in a town 2 markets away. You might spin faster, arm extended, spindle swapped for a rim that stores momentum like a trained circle. But wheels cost, and adoption tricks you by traveling on roads you cannot see. Historians still argue whether such wheels reached small rural parishes in your century, or whether spindles ruled most ordinary rooms for much longer, while wheels clustered in wealthier or gilded households. Your spindle doesn't argue. It just asks for fingers and time, and you can pay both. In the corner, the quern waits for morning. 2 stones and a handle that schools your shoulders. You consider giving it 10 turns now. But decide the house has had enough gravel music for the night. Instead, you pick over dried beans, sorting stones and chaff, the kind of attention that prevents broken teeth and broken tempers tomorrow. Your fingers feel for wrong shapes as easily as your eyes read letters. Life has trained them both to edit. You light a second short rush to walk a tiny circuit. Water bucket topped, embers tucked, the child covered, the cloak rehung as draft filler, marzipan's successor pinched out before you sit again. The second rush burns faster than the first, as if working on commission. Perhaps you cut it thinner. You shrug and forgive it. Not everything has to be excellent to be useful. A joke you tell yourself often when evaluating your own songs. A final task. You braid a length of cord from 3 strands of the thread you spun earlier. Then tie it around the distaff tuft to keep it tidy. The braid is a small satisfaction, a visible "I made this" in a room that otherwise prefers low-key triumphs. You lay the spindle across the basket, the needle in its case, a little bone tube, its cap a carved acorn. Yes, you talk to it. No, you will not be accepting questions. And the mended shirt on the peg where morning hands will find it by feel. You flex your back and feel the warm line the wrapped stone left on your calves calling you back to bed. Before you obey, you pour a spoon of warm oat mash into a wooden cup. The oats you set earlier are now the consistency of resolve. And sip. Calorie warmth, lamp warmth, animal warmth, ember warmth, work warmth. The night has many small suns if you keep them modest and in their lanes. You prefer this orchestra to any single trumpet. The rushlight gutters toward its last almond. You say goodnight to marzipan with a ridiculous little bow. The flame performs its vanishing act properly. In the dim, you can still find the bed because your feet know where the floor remembers them. You slip under the patchwork, and the house accepts your surrender with one more settling sigh. Spinning done, mending done, peas shelled, barley toasted, pot fixed, cord braided. Nothing glamorous, everything deliberate. The thread on the spindle is not a sleeve yet. The mended elbow is not a harvest. The sorted beans are not a feast. But you have pushed the line that divides enough from not yet, a few inches toward dawn. And inches, like embers, add up. If a scholar came now with a quill and a theory about productivity curves, you'd lend them a stool and a rushlight and invite them to darn a cuff while they explain. They might even agree before the cuff is finished. You turn your cheek to the linen, angle the cap's tail into the turnip tuck, and let the repetitive kindness of work dissolve into the repetitive kindness of breathing. Tomorrow will want your hands again. Tonight they have already earned their sleep. You count warmth in sticks long before you count it in degrees. The hearth is modest, the night is not, and fuel is a currency with laws older than your elbows. You shoulder your basket and step into the lane where frost has sown a pale crop under moonlight. Tonight's errand is legal, useful, and the kind that invites careful remembering. What you may take, where, and how much before the woodward's eyebrows climb into the parish rafters. Mainstream fact. Many medieval villagers held customary commons rights under manorial law. Among them estovers, the right to take necessary wood from certain lands. Firewood, sometimes fireboat. House repairs, houseboat. Hedging, hedgeboat. Sometimes even cart or plow needs, plowboat. The names vary by place, but the idea is steady. Deadwood, windfall, top and lop from pollarded trees. Never the Lord's straight green trunks unless you fancy a fine that bites. You practice the etiquette of the hedge like it's a catechism. Pick up what the wind has already argued loose. Cut only where custom nods. Carry your bundle so it looks like prudence and not ambition. Pollarded willows along the stream stand like old men with tidy haircuts. Trunks kept short, heads sprouting coppice sticks you can harvest and regrow on a rhythm of years. You trim a few with your billhook, the blade's curve making a tidy sigh despite the frost. Coppice and pollard aren't just tree barbering. They're time machines, replacing timber with a cycle you can plan meals around. Your basket fills with kindling, not conquest. The hedge, grateful, remains a hedge. You move on to the furze bank, gorse and broom, where winter hoards a different sort of flame. Gorse burns hot and fast, Broom is a polite guest that leaves little ash. You clip, careful of thorns, and think of tomorrow's first fire coaxed into confidence by these mean little stars. Quirky tidbit. Some families kept a dedicated bee bundle of touchwood, crumbly fungus or punky wood that catches a spark like gossip, and stored it dry as pride in a clay pot. A good pot of touchwood is an inheritance that smells faintly of rain and wizardry. You pat yours in your pocket, a domestic talisman that has saved more mornings than anyone brags about. At the ditch you collect bracken, last summer's brown feathers matted into patience. Bracken becomes bed for beasts, and a sly layer under rushes on the floor. Dry, it also makes a shy flame that gives up quickly but politely, the sort of heat that takes the edge off a room's worst thoughts. You tie the fronds with cord you braided in section 11 and stand to test the night. Breath white, fingertips honest, basket heavier in the good, right way. A neighbor emerges like a myth in a cloak, one of those old myths that carries an empty trug and a smile. She has 3 children asleep and a 4th called January. You exchange what winter can spare. You have broom and bracken. She has a twist of pitchy splinters from last summer's roof fix, resin-rich kindlers that catch like they remember the sun. A barter of sticks for sticks, but also a barter of goodwill for later. She'll watch your child at the bakehouse day. You'll stitch her cloak hem when the thaw lifts spirits but not thread. The village runs on roofs, hands, and this soft bookkeeping. You angle toward the common pasture's edge where cart ruts hold blue ice, and the hawthorn hedge wears a crown of hoarfrost. The woodward, if he sees you, will count without counting. Deadfall only, no green, no accidental pruning, tall enough to need a ladder. You bend to a limb the wind has already dismissed, and feel its weight like a small future. The cat has followed in stealth, because supervising bundles is a core competency. You accept the furry audit. The cat approves nothing and everything. Fuel isn't only wood. Where the Lord permits, you cut turf from the turbary, peat carved in bricks from the bog, stacked in little cathedrals to dry, then burned in a slow, earthy way that makes smoke into a smell you will one day call November. Peat fires are patient and a little melancholy. They also save trees. You lift 2 dry turves from the neighbor's rack with permission earned by helping her stack last month. The bog remembers all feet. You tread lightly, because the ground keeps grudges in mud. Dung, dried and orderly cakes, waits by the byre wall. Tomorrow it will bake at the hearth edge and become another sort of flame. Nothing glamorous. Everything fuel. The cow has opinions about this. The cow also supplies the raw material, which is democracy of a kind. You glance toward the river road where a carter once sold sea coal, fossil fuel fetched from the shore and shipped inland. And remember the city rumor that coal smoke tastes like pennies and shouts at the rafters. Historians still argue whether rural hearths like yours saw much coal before later centuries, or whether that black thunder belonged mostly to towns where money traded lungs for heat. Your cottage prefers the grammar of wood, peat, and patience. A hedge gate rattles. The Reeves lantern ghosts between trees. Measuring bundles by the old arithmetic. A faggot, the period word for a bundle of sticks, innocent as rope, should be arm-thick, head-high, tied to travel, not a dragon horde disguised as kindling. You lift your bundle, neither meek nor proud. The Reeve tips his lantern. You tip your cap. He notes the dead wood, the tidy cuts, the tidy soul, and nods you along. Rules are not always enemies. Sometimes they are fences that keep cows from sleeping in your kitchen. On the lane home you glean, winter's version of late summer gleaning in the fields after harvest. In August, you picked fallen barley heads with the poor, the widowed, and the stubborn. In January, you pick what the hedgerow has let go. Gleaning and harvest is custom in many parishes, sometimes a rite with teeth. In others, it's charity with sharp eyes. The difference sits in the manor court's minute book and the steward's breakfast. Historians still argue whether gleaning's force of law status matched the generous stories or leaned more on neighborly habit enforced by glare. Your basket remembers this year's field kindly. The steward did not chase hands from stubble, and the Lord's wife pretended not to count. Back at the door, you thump your bundle against the jamb to shake loose frost. Sticks go on one side by size. Spark persuaders, decent citizens, stubborn ants, and tomorrow's long talks. A billet thick as your wrist earns a place of honor for morning's rekindling. You stack turves in a little tower that will offend the cat's minimalist sensibilities later. The cloaked neighbor's pitch sticks you wrap and hang from a peg. Their resin will drip courtesy if you allow it a cloth. The hearth wakes when you cough politely at it with the bellows, adding no flame, only breath. Kindlers lead the shy ember to a conversation. Broom takes the hint and speaks. A decent citizen of a stick makes a case. The ash blanket nods. Heat grows the way sound grows in a choir. One voice, then three. None shouting. You feed the new warmth the way you fed your body in Section 7. Steady, small, repeat. Tonight's wages get counted in barter as much as bundles. You walk across the lane with 6 good sticks and come back with a handful of onions from a neighbor's loft. Another friend will lend a basket of peat in February if your child helps card wool next week. Someone else will trade you a turn at the bakehouse oven for 2 hours mending a sleeve and refooting a sock. Coins matter at market. Inside winter, favors heat the fastest. You take a moment for the house's other fuels, talk and permission. You ask the child to sort kindling by length and watch their cold, reddened fingers move like clever birds. You praise them for bundles that don't laugh apart. You send them to return a borrowed billhook in the morning with a loaf heel as thanks. Tools like bread as much as people do. The child beams, enlarged by being useful. An ember you'll keep fed on purpose. Mainstream fact returns in wooden shoes. Manorial courts recorded quarrels about who cut greenwood, who took more than their share, who trespassed for turf or furs. Set fines could be ruin on a bad week. Yet those same rolls show permissions, estovers confirmed, pollards allocated, coppice cycles set like parish clocks made of trees. This is law with mud on its boots, a system that works when everyone pretends the year is kinder than it is, and then quietly adjusts when it isn't. You lay 2 stubborn aunts to the side. They're wet and will sour the room. The cat sniffs and agrees, filing a formal "do not burn" in the Department of No's. You pin a little note to your mind. Those can dry above the hearth bay, not close enough to scorch, close enough to learn manners. Joke 1. You promote yourself to stick accountant, with a ledger balanced in splinters and satisfaction. A thought for dawn. Fetch a barrow of hedge trimmings from the lane end where the Lord's men laid them. Free for the taking if you ask the woodward instead of asking forgiveness. Keep to the cycle. Pollard again in the year that ends in... Your grandfather knew which years, so do the trees. Thank the bog. Thank the hedge. Thank your own back with a heated stone at night, because bodies have estovers too, and rest is one of them. You pack the last rags into the door's gossip hole and feel the draft give up a grudge. The room's climate settles into its familiar provinces. Hearth warm, bed mild, door crisp, byre wall kind. The bundle you carried becomes tomorrow's temper, measured out in thumb-thick peace and finger-thin patience. You fold your nightcap into its turnip tuck. because some customs exist to make scholars roll their eyes and ears stay warm. You have not stolen heat from the woods tonight. You have borrowed it with interest. The hedge will grow back, the willow will sprout, the firs will try to take over the entire world as soon as April remembers itself. Your job is to return what you can by not asking too much at once. The village will remember who does this well. So will winter, in its grudging way. You slide under the patched blanket, a legislator of small laws, ash above coals, moss and shutter seam, sticks counted, favors owed, thanks paid. Outside, frost rehearses its grammar on the hedge. Inside, your ledger closes with a warm signature. Ember, ember, ember. You step outside and discover that roads at night are made of the same stuff as worries, longer than they look and fond of turning. Your cloak pulls the heat of the cottage after you like a reluctant child. The turnip cap achieves its highest degree. The cat refuses to join because it has tenure in warmth studies. The lane glows a little under hoarfrost and moon, and every hedge becomes a congregation of cautious statues who only pretend to be bushes. You wriggle your toes inside their knitted optimism and set out toward an answer called Somewhere Else Warm. The village has lowered its voice. Curfew, cover fire you remembered in Section 3, has already sung. Doors bar, shutters blink once, then hold still. Mainstream fact. Long before proper street lighting and wide pavements, the Statute of Winchester, late 13th century in England, told parishes to keep nightly watch and clear highways of brush for a set distance, so ambushes had fewer admirers and hue and cry had fewer excuses. Whether your parish obeys depends on how persuasive the reeve is, and whether brambles believe in law. Tonight the lane looks recently argued with. You still keep your walking stick like a courteous opinion. Your first waypoint is the alehouse, a low door, a swinging bunch of evergreen to say new ale drawn, a window that exhales yeast scent and warmth like gossip. Alehouse, tavern, inn, cousins, not twins. An alehouse sells drink and talk. A tavern leans toward wine where trade permits. An inn promises beds and stabling with a face that says, "Please pay." You tap the door. It opens as if it's happy to see you're cold. The room turns to appraise your coins, your face, your boots, and your intentions in that order. You offer the correct mix, honest, tired, solvent. The host nods. A pallet by the hearth would be a poem. A pallet by the door will do. You negotiate straw and a bowl's worth of warmth in ale form. There's a town carrier asleep on a bench doing an impression of a bag of potatoes, a peddler with bells stitched to a dream, a dog who has mastered the law of angles and heat. You wedge yourself into the geometry that gets your calves a vote in the meeting. Quirky tidbit. Some alehouses kept a communal nap cloak near the hearth, a garment of disputed parentage and unquestioned smoke. Its warmth outweighed its biography. You consider it. You decide that your own cloak, though humbler, knows your name and will therefore refrain from revenge. Conversation here runs on low gas. Prices and potholes, the new Reeves lantern, rumor of wolves on the heath from a man who pronounces wolf like a challenge. Historians still argue whether wolves still prowled in significant numbers in your region and century, or whether the beasts belonged mostly to older fear and farther forests. Either way, the night itself plays the role convincingly enough that you decide not to audition for it. You sip ale, small, honest, and feel hearth heat rent a little space in your bones. The host lays an extra billet on the fire with the solemnity of a priest. You would canonize that billet if asked. If coins shy away from your hand, there are other doors. Church porches, for one. the deep stone-shouldered entry that keeps weather from the nave door. In many parishes, they double as busy daytime rooms for contracts and witnessings. By night, they become unheeded honesty, a roof and a windbreak. You thank the host, tighten your cloak, and walk the short lane to the churchyard where grave mounds wear white caps, and the yew's shadow remembers every winter. The porch smells like damp stone, old wood, and the letters carved into both. You settle on the bench and pull your knees up, head in cap, cap in hood, hood in cloak, a nesting doll of patience. In some places, the beadle would shoo you with a stick of authority and the authority of a stick. In others, no one shooed, or only shooed gently, as long as you did not shiver loudly or snore in Latin. Historians still argue whether sleeping in porches was broadly tolerated as rough hospitality for the poor and traveling, or mostly frowned on. A last resort wrapped in sermon thunder. Tonight, the beadle's stick snores somewhere else. You keep your shoes close, your pack closer, and your sense of humor immediate. Joke 1, whispered. If anyone asks, you're here to make sure the church doesn't feel lonely. Other options exist for the luckier. A monastic hospitium where a porter with a ring of keys will produce soup and a pallet, as if you were Christ disguised as a mud map. A hospital, older than the word's later medical ambition, where travelers share beds with the sick and the pious. A guild hall floor if you are kin to the right trade. A manor hall settle if the steward believes in reputations. A friend's byre loft where the cows perform their heating duties with signature excellence. Hospitality is a patchwork with strong and frayed squares. Your parish owns a few good patches and shares them with thrift, which is to say, according to memory. You walk on, because some nights you have to, past the bridge whose toll man practices sleeping with one eye open and both hands honest, past the ford that in summer is a rumor and in winter thinks itself a dragon, past hedges that each tell the same story about frost and are never boring about it. Your horn lantern, slats of scraped horn pretending to be cloudy glass, mutters a smoky light. Marzipan would be jealous if it were here. You promise the rushlight a poem later. Roadside customs help or don't, depending on which saint minds the weather. A wayside cross offers orientation to both map and soul. A stone with a hollow where offerings collect is half charity box, half memorial. You leave a pea, yes, a pea, from section 11's bowl, because it is what you have a plural of, and because gratitude likes being specific. In return, you take courage, which is heavier to carry, and therefore more nourishing. At the edge of the hamlet, the last serendipity. A cart shed with one side open and a newish smell of hay. You ask the night's invisible landlord for permission, always ask, even when no one answers, and bed down on a corner that looks least like a wheel will roll over it. You keep your cloak under, not over. Under steals less heat. Your hands make a pillow out of the less muddy part of your sleeve. You hide your shoes in your cloak's embrace. You entertain the idea of sleep as if it were a cat that will come if you don't call. Joke 2. You tell your toes the hay is a luxury mattress imported from the continent. Your toes, noble but not gullible, except with conditions. Mainstream fact returns with the in-tier again. On major roads radiating from market towns, coaching inns of later centuries have ancestors. Simple lodgings with shared rooms, straw on floors, a rate that sometimes included hay for the horse and implied you were your own chambermaid. In the country you take what exists: alehouse pallet, porch, byre loft, cart shed corner, neighbor's bench, a barn aisle where a bucket stands guard like a knight. The price range runs from coin to prayer, to promise of labor tomorrow. You can afford at least 2 of those. You practice rules that have kept travelers from waking as anecdotes. Sleep with the pack strapped. Keep a hand on the pocket that matters. Do not insult dogs, they remember syllables. Do not sleep so close to the road that carts will audition for your ribs. Do not brag about coins in an alehouse where the only illuminated manuscript is the fire. The night is a law teacher who grades on a curve that never curves upward. Time slides. The sky pulls snow out of its sleeve and sprinkles the rumor of it across your hood. Your breath fogs a curtain between you and the rest of the cold. Somewhere an owl writes comments on the dark with authority. You doze, wake, doze. Your back learns the exact shape of a floorboard knot and files it under intimacy. You turn, careful to keep the warm you've grown under your cloak from wandering off. Joke 3. You inform the floor that if it behaves, you'll recommend it to other travelers. The floor, flattered, creaks modestly. If second sleep finds you, a porch's benediction, a cart shed's consent, you'll rise for a minute to check your emberless situation. No ash to smooth, but there is the body to bank. You curl a little tighter, cap-tail tucked, cloak edge under hip, knees toward belly, breath paced like a slow song. The same tricks work anywhere. Trap the heat you make. Avoid generous drafts. Keep the mind from staging boisterous theater. Imagine the cottages along the lane, the banked coals glowing like little villages inside the village. Borrow their idea from afar. Historians still argue whether night travel was rare and desperate or merely cautious and common, calibrated by moonlight and season. You adopt the field position. It is doable, and sometimes necessary, and always improved by a door that opens, a palate that doesn't ask questions, a bowl that mistakes itself for kindness. Dawn will come with the color of pewter. The inn will sell porridge. The church porch will return to being a doorway with public duties and private silences. You will put your feet on a road that looks shorter in daylight and rediscover the village as if it had been missing you. For now, you count your traveling hearth. A hood, a cloak, a body, a corner out of the wind, and the knowledge that somewhere behind you, a banked ember keeps your house from feeling abandoned. The night grades you on intention, and you pass, barely, which is the traditional margin. When sleep finally takes your hand, it does what it does best, pretends to be nothing while making everything easier. You discover that cold has a personal vocabulary for every joint. It prefers your fingers for punctuation, your toes for footnotes, and your ears for editorials written in frost. The morning promises to be a negotiation. The night demands down payment. So you sit at the bed's edge, cap in full turnip tuck, and take stock of the aches that winter collects like taxes. Start with the hands. The skin on your knuckles has become a map of small red countries. Chilblains, those irritated provinces between warm and frozen where blood flow forgets the rules. You rub them with a little goose fat saved from a luckier supper, working it in until the skin stops writing angry letters to your mitts. Mainstream fact. Animal fats, goose, tallow, even warmed lard, were common salves for cracked skin and chilblains in medieval households. Sometimes mixed with beeswax or herbs like marigold. Salves promised a barrier, not a miracle. And sometimes that was precisely enough. You blow on your hands, slow and patient, because warmth in fingers is a kind of literacy. It lets you hold needles, spoons, and mornings. Feet next. You lift them from under the blanket, and they complain with the sincerity of choir boys. The wrapped stone has done good work. Still, the skin along your heels feels tight, and your toes have discovered sulking as a lifestyle. You rub them briskly, then dab a little vinegar. Yes, Vinegar. Because the sting wakes the capillaries like a sermon. Quirky tidbit. Some folks swear by a hot onion poultice for cold feet. Onion sliced, warmed, tied in cloth, and applied to soles as if recruiting vegetables to the parish of warmth. Whether it cures or merely distracts. Your toes enjoy a story with a smell. You pull on your socks or foot wraps again and flex the ankle joint until it stops imitating a martyr. There is a rhythm to this. Warm the skin from outside with salve or rubbing, then from inside with food and breath. Your breath counts learned in section 10, 1, 3, 1, secretly doubles as a slow bellows for blood. You practice it now, not because the saints take attendance, but because lungs and fingers have been colleagues for a very long time. Ears are small but ambitious in their suffering. The cap handles them well. Still, the tips flirt with insult. A smear of fat along the rim and a stricter tuck under the cap's edge, and they resign from their protest committee. Nose too, that aristocrat of drafts. A dab of tallow on the bridge and the habit of breathing through linen. And it stops composing icier poetry. Your face becomes less of a weather report and more of a person. A deeper ache stands up at your lower back and clears its throat. That is the ache of hauling water that pretends to be a rock and wood that pretends to be a very slow animal. You stretch, carefully, knees to chest under the blanket, small circles until the spine remembers it is a friend. You feel the tiny clicks like distant sleigh bells. Heat helps, so the warmed stone gets promoted to traveling physician and takes a turn along the sore places. You write the stone a testimonial in your head. Somewhere, a guild of rocks beams. The joints in your fingers do a different trick, the small ache that warns you about damp. Smoke helps dry the room, but your bones vote on weather regardless. You wrap a strip of wool around the wrist like a bracelet of sanity and tie it, not too tight, with the same knot you use for sacks. A wool wristband is less glamorous than talismans, but more effective than sighing, and you commit to it like a fashion house of one. Mainstream fact again. Herb simples, single herb remedies, pepper medieval recipe books and leech books, mustard plasters to draw blood to the skin, rosemary or sage baths for sore limbs when water and fuel permit, chamomile for aches and nerves, garlic and honey for everything that scares you. Whether you call it physic or kitchen, the boundaries blur under a low roof. Historians still argue whether rural folk relied primarily on household remedies, wise women, and monastic infirmaries, or whether itinerant practitioners, cunning folk, charmers, filled a larger share of the winter medical map than tidy sources admit. Your cottage practices a coalition: pantry, saint, neighbor, stubbornness. You heat a little water, just enough to be expensive, and drop in a sprig of rosemary traded for firewood in section 12. The scent rises, a green ghost of summer. You soak a cloth, wring it, and lay it over your wrists for a count of 30, then your ankles, then the back of your neck. Warmth crawls politely into places it was not invited. You thank it anyway. If fortune ever lets you steep chamomile, you will be the kind of person who cries a little with relief and forgives 3 enemies. For cracked heels and knuckles, there is also beeswax, harder to afford than tallow, kinder to skin. And if you can coax a thimbleful from a neighbor whose hives outlived the last frost, you melt it with a thumb of lard in a shell and make a salve that smells faintly of summer and thrift. You pat it on and admire your hands, which have never made it in the harp business, and yet keep a household alive on 12 strings of work. You take inventory of your other remedies, some of which are practices and not potions. Move slowly before moving fast. Warm the joints before asking them to lift opinions. Keep water near the hearth and the hearth near your schedule. Let bread rise in the warmest corner, which is also where feet like to be. That way the heat does two duties, and no part of the room feels underemployed. You get more sleep than you want and less than you deserve. You steal rest in the intermissions between first and second sleep by not reading the minutes of your own anxiety. A child whimpers in their half-dream. Cold has found a seam. You slide the warmed brick to their side, lay your palm over their socked foot, and tell a very short story about a goat who wore mittens correctly. The whimper dissolves. The small foot contracts to gratitude. You have invented a local anesthetic called being held. Doctors take notes on that one centuries later and pretend they discovered it. Joke 1. You charge 2 peas and a thank you. The patient pays and snores. For coughs that winter lends like a spiteful librarian, you keep a pot for syrup. Honey if you have it. Onions if you must. The two together if you delight in effectiveness over fragrance. A slice of onion softened in honey at the hearth edge becomes a spoon of calm when midnight decides to tickle throats. If neither onion nor honey is kind this week, a cup of hot water with a pinch of sage or thyme will line a raw throat with courage long enough to find sleep again. The throat thanks you in the morning by being less of a weather vane. You mind your nails because winter loves splitting them into exclamation points. Grease after washing. Push back ragged edges with the handle of your spoon. Stop gnawing them when you think. Let the knife do the cutting and let patience do the rest. Splinters are small jokes told by wood. Remove them earlier than you remove complaints. If a finger grows hot and red at the nail, a warm soak and a whispered apology to your future self go farther than cursing. Toes own their own peculiar remedies. If they turn sullen purple, you do not roast them awake by the fire. No sudden pride or you'll recruit pain as a colleague. You wrap them, warm them slowly, and walk a little in place to persuade blood to remember its root. Shoes have straw inside tonight. Tomorrow they may get a little sheep's wool, if the felting project cooperates and the cat doesn't unionize the scrap bag. Somewhere a night boasts about frostbite. You roll your eyes so hard your cap shifts. Neighbors bring their own recipes when they bring gossip. Vinegar of the 4 thieves, boiled in rumor and spices. Garlic pounded with goose grease for chests that rattle. A witch bottle buried by the threshold to ward off nightmares. You listen politely, then decide your threshold is happier wearing boots and hagstones. Section 10. Not glass. You accept the jar of mustard seeds with gratitude. Crushed with a little flour and water, they can warm a chilled calf nicely if you're wise enough to remove the cloth before skin pitches a protest. You do a final survey. Wrists warm, ankles coaxed, back soothed, throat quiet, hands greased, heels reasonable, ears obedient, nose resigned. You tuck the salve shell on the shelf next to the mended pot from section 11 and the touchwood jar from section 12, your little museum of remedies that work because you do them, not because anyone canonized them. Historians still argue whether cold-related ailments were the constant tyrant sermons suggest, or the seasonal nuisances that households handled with routine. But your ledger reads like this. Aches come, remedies come, work continues, and kindness, fat, heat, cloth, patience, makes more difference than drama. You remain uninterested in being a martyr to weather when you could be an archivist of practical comforts. You lower yourself under the blanket and feel your body thank you with a shy, whole warmth. The stone at your calves hums like a low drone in a song. The byre wall lends its animal hush. The embers under ash remember your earlier obedience and promise to exist in the morning with very little fuss. Joke 2, murmured. You inform winter that you accept its resignation effective at dawn. Winter responds it has tenure. You counteroffer with mitts. You close your eyes. The aches have been seen, salved, and coaxed. They agree to attend tomorrow in gentler fonts. Breath lengthens. The cat relocates to your knees with a sense of medical authority that would scandalize universities. Somewhere, a scholar argues about apothecaries' reach in villages like yours. Somewhere else, a neighbor blows on their own chilly red fingers and discovers the same truth you did. Warmth is an ensemble. Food, fat, fabric, fire, and the slow human habit of taking care. Joke 3. Barely voiced. If anyone asks, you prescribe 1 warmed brick, 2 layers of wool, 3 kinds of patience, and 4 lines of a song you like. You hum the song at 1/4 volume and 1/4 speed until even the rafters stop aching. Then the night resumes without you, and you let it, because you've done the work that makes sleep a remedy too. You look around and realize the house itself is a winter tool you live inside. Not a castle, no banners, no buttery, but a modest machine for trading wind for patience. Every part that touches weather has an opinion about keeping you through the night. You begin at the crown, the thatch. Thatch is grass pretending to be architecture, and it succeeds because it knows how to overlap. Reed, straw, rush, laid thick in courses that shrug water down and away. It becomes a deep coat that traps air like wool. You run your hand along the underside where smoke has lacquered it into a dark, glossy pelt. It feels like touching the word shelter. Mainstream fact. Properly kept thatch can last decades, 20, 30, even more with sound ridgework and regular patching. Its depth both roof and insulation. The smoke you grumble about does the roof a favor, drying out damp, discouraging bugs who thought your ceiling was a salad bar. You decide to forgive smoke one of its ruder habits. Your eye drops to the walls which, to outsiders, are mud, but to you are a composite with a resume. Wattle-and-daub is the village's sweater with plaster, hazel rods interlaced, then a mix of clay, sand, chopped straw, and dung pressed and smoothed until the wind has to spell its name at the door. Between posts, the daub goes on in lifts, dries, cracks a little, and gets massaged back to goodness with fresh handfuls. You tamp one of those hairline openings now and feel the draft surrender. The wall answers with quiet pride. Good work, apprentice weather wrangler. Corners matter more than drama. You learn to read them the way sailors read a wake. A cold lick under the sill, moss, rag, daub, a whisper along a post, a bead of clay, a sliver of wood, a scolded spider web left intact to tattletale on future breezes, a timber that drinks damp from the ground. You wedge a flat stone under its foot so the post stops learning to be a sponge. The house prefers small surgery to grand rescues. So do your shoulders. Windows, not many, not large, are deliberate stinginess. A bigger view is a bigger leak, so you keep to tiny shutters and oiled cloth. Maybe a horn pane if the household ledger had a generous week. All day you barter light for heat. At night you choose heat and pay with darkness. You've made your peace with that trade. Bed is not a viewing platform, and the view in winter is mostly your own breath. Joke 1, contentedly small. If you wanted a panorama, you'd live in a field and be called a turnip. You think of the houses that wear turf as coats, the earthen banks heaped against outside walls, the partial dug dwellings that hug ground like a hedgehog. In hillier places, people tuck rooms into slopes. In colder ones, they thicken walls with sod where stone is scarce and wind is thorough. A turf apron keeps frost from gnawing the wall's ankles, and the bog across the lane seems to nod as if to say, "Told you I was useful." Your own house isn't half buried, but you admire the principle. Go low, go thick, go patient. Floors tell stories about climate and purse. Dirt tamped hard is honest and cold and excellent at reminding you to keep shoes near the bed. A scatter of rushes, swapped when virtue and time align, turns the floor into a sensible mat that insulates bare feet from sudden theology. If you were grander, boards would creak out proverbs under rugs. If poorer, you'd still sweep the earth and call it tidy. You settle for swept, and a path from bed to hearth marked in good intentions. The hearth itself doubles as design. No high-flaring bonfire, a low, ash-banked ember bed that gives heat a chance to stay. Overhead lives the smoke bay, your almost chimney, a framed void where smoke collects like a slow cloud and finds its own road through the thatch. In richer rooms, a hood would gather fume into a proper throat. In later centuries, stacks of brick would column smoke into the sky with manners. You have methods, not monuments. Historians still argue whether your parish adopted built stacks in this exact slice of time, or kept to smoke bays longer, and whether the change was driven by fashion, fuel, or fines about fire risk. Your nose votes for whatever makes less sting, and your purse votes for whatever already exists. You walk the outside in your head, even while standing inside. Eaves that reach deep keep rain from racing down walls and trying the floor for membership. A sill stone proud of the wall sheds water like a duck shrugging. Windward side packed tighter, leeward side allowed to breathe. Gaps near the ridge small enough to invite smoke out but refuse weather in. The house survives by mixed metaphors. It should be a cloak, a hat, a cup turned upside down, and a politely vented oven. There's carpentry in the timber that you can't see but can feel. Braces take the sideways shove of wind and push back without complaint. Pegs swell in their holes when air is wet. Joints tighten as if the house is putting on a belt for a storm. A good frame isn't fancy. It's sensible geometry and dry wood. You thump a post with your knuckle and hear the sound your father listened for. Not hollow, not dull, but a resigned contentment. The house is awake without being nervous. Quirky tidbit. Some people draw protective marks on new timbers right after raising. Initials, circles, daisy wheels, even the odd scratch charm, on the theory that spirits are curious and get stuck tracing the lines. Whether spirits or mice are the more frequent visitors is a separate matter. You stroke one of those circles and feel braver, which is half the point of marks. They make courage feel like joinery. Your pallet's position is part of the engineering. Not too close to the door, where the crisp province drafts tax your ankles. Not right under the smoke river, unless you are fond of coughing lullabies. Near the byre wall if you like a little moo with your morning. Further off if the cow has been generous with fragrance. You become a tiny meteorologist who adjusts furniture to weather maps only you can see. Move the low chest an inch, suddenly the blanket edge no longer flutters. Slide the stool, now your knees don't rehearse complaints. The house edits itself with season. In summer you open everything and teach wind to be a guest. The rush is thin, the door lingers. Cooking goes outdoors whenever smoke ends its marriage with appetite. In winter you shrink the world to a warm kernel. Shutter, latch, ash, cloth, cap. The same walls do both jobs without theatrical speeches. You trust them more for their quiet. Light has its architecture too. You install it where it pays rent. In corners where tasks live, on pegs near the door, on a bracket by the bed for the between sleeps hour when you become Ember's solicitor again. You angle the rush so the wick doesn't smoke the beam. You move a polished pot to cast a brighter crescent on your work. The little brass or iron you own becomes mirror and moon, and you act like someone who has a lighting plan even if the plan is, this looks less gloomy. A thought about materials you haven't named yet. Lime wash. A slurry of lime brushed over daub turns walls bright and fends off damp with a chemistry lecture your hands never needed to pass. It needs renewing like everything else. When new, it throws back what little daylight you steal and helps the room feel less like a pocket and more like a held breath. Your walls wear smoke instead tonight. You still picture them white in spring, a small miracle you can perform with a bucket and a brush. You practice the habit of keeping the roof fed. Not with hay, that's for beasts, but with attention. A slipped reed let back, a ridge stitched again with a spar. A thorn branch discouraged from introducing itself, a rook's fancy nest relocated with an apology. The ridge is where pride lives. If the ridge sulks, the whole house catches it. You can't climb in snow, but you promise the roof you'll bring hands and laughter on the first dry day. Mainstream fact again. Houses like yours drift across the centuries under changing names. Cruck-framed halls, longhouses, byre-houses, cottages, adapting by region, timber supply, law, and habit. Some gain extra rooms as families and purses swell. Some shrink back when plague or poor harvests erode elbows. The genius is not grandeur, but modular stubbornness. A frame you can patch, a wall you can stuff, a roof you can mend from a ladder and a prayer. A palace resists change, a cottage negotiates it. You accept that your house has a personality and you cater to it. It likes ash troweled smooth at night, shutters wedged, cloth hung where drafts get ambitious, and jokes small enough not to wake the rafters. It forgives your singing if you keep time splitting firewood. It objects to wet logs and loud pride. It rewards routine by becoming warmer than the air has any right to be. Joke 2. Used as a hammer tap rather than a cymbal crash. If a scholar arrives and asks you to define vernacular architecture, you'll hand them a broom, point them at the door seam and say, "Start there." The rest of the definition will appear as your toes stop complaining. You straighten the peg rail, more for your mind than the pegs. Cloak, cord, bag, mended shirt, salve shell, touchwood jar. Each object is a word in the sentence your house says to winter. The syntax is sensible. Subject, roof, verbs, keeps, object, you. Adverbs, stubbornly, quietly, long enough to see dawn. As you settle back onto the bed edge, you watch your breath write little clouds that vanish. Houses exhale too, through thatch, through cracks grown disciplined, through the unflappable patience of wood that expands and contracts like lungs made of forest. Historians still argue whether our idea of cozy belongs here at all, or whether survival rooms like this simply aimed at not miserable, with true coziness being a guest that visits only after chores. Your verdict. Call it what you like. The room is warmer than the lane, and the blanket smells like competence. Joke 3. Final and drowsy. You congratulate the house on being a very large, very patient garment you wear from the inside. It does not bow. It creaks the creak that means, you're welcome. You lie down, tuck the cattail, and feel the building's engineered kindness gather around you. Thatch above, daub behind, timber bracing the night, tiny window sealed, ash over embers. A bad roof is a sermon. A good roof is silence. Your house is very quiet. You become quiet to match it, and the winter, finding less to push against, spends itself on the hedge instead of your bones. Winter stops being background and applies for the job of king. It signs its name on the door with a knife of wind, and then kicks the hinges to see who squeaks. You wake to a silence that isn't peace, but pressure. Snow has laid a hand over every sound. The thatch sags in a courteous bow. The shutter furs up. Your breath writes larger ghosts. Routine becomes triage. You are still you, cap tucked, wool layered, brick wrapped. But the scale of the night has changed, and the village changes with it. First task, lighten the roof. A broom handle with a hook, just a bent stick really, becomes a bishop's crozier for snow. You reach up, tug, let the white slither, and listen for relief in the rafters. Thatch carries many insults. Weight is not one you let linger. The eaves sneeze a powdery sigh. You smile at the sound of gravity doing you a favor for once. Water is now a rumor inside a stone jar. The wellhead wears armor. The bucket rope is a rod. You set a pot by the embers and melt snow into usefulness, knowing that snow is stingy. Whole baskets of it agreeing to be a single mug. You burn fuel to buy seconds of liquid. Mainstream fact. During recorded great frosts across Europe, chronicled in many centuries, rivers froze hard enough to bear carts, mills stopped, fish weirs stood on crystal floors, and towns rationed heat and food, while church bells stuck in their own mouths of ice. You picture carts skirting where barges used to swing, wheels skidding on a road no one paid for. You ration the day like a steward with a flint heart and a warm soul. Fuel gets measured in fingers and thumbs. Food is stacked by stubbornness first. Flavor later. Pottage thickens. Bread slices thin. The oat pot moves nearer the embers, a planet closer to its sun. You tell yourself a story about spring, not lies, just distant minutes, and notice how much warmer hope is when you tie it to chores. A joke small enough not to offend the weather. When your spoon stands upright in the bowl, you declare it a local miracle and promote yourself to ladle bishop. The congregation approves quietly. Paths must exist where doors hope to be. You tamp snow into a modest track between threshold and byre, then sprinkle ash so feet remember where not to lie down. The cow breathes steam like a saint in a window. You rub her ears, animals lose heat at the edges, and lavish a little fat on the tips so frost thinks twice. Quirky tidbit, some country folk greased combs and wattles on chickens with lard and brutal snaps, a barnyard pomade that kept frostbite from stealing tomorrow's breakfast. The hens look surprised at their spa day, then forgive you when the grain rattles. Then the crisis underneath the crisis, the mill wheel still. Grain that needed grinding last week didn't, and every kitchen in the parish hears the silent sermon of stones that won't turn. You fetch the hand quern from its corner and relearn its ancient language. Turn, turn, rest. The sound is gravel and duty. Your shoulders argue, but they don't win. Historians still argue whether communities kept household querns illegally when lords tried to force use of manorial mills, or whether such bans softened in practice during emergencies. Either way, in a winter like this, everyone remembers which way to push. Neighbors show up at the door without ceremony, hats rhymed, questions brief. You share heat like lit candles, not like cut bread. One flame can light another without shrinking. Someone brings a joint of salted pork you helped brine in kinder weather. Someone else brings news. The river is a floor. A boy skated on shoes wrapped in bone. The reeve fell once and swore holy poetry. You laugh in the correct places because laughter is extra wool on the inside. Inside the church, the air is colder than virtue. Outside, though, the porch is a lecture on shelter with walls for emphasis. The priest chalks a plea to heaven over the door, letters in a white that needn't compete with snow. Candles, the good wax, kept for this, burn steadier than rushlight and make a different kind of courage. You cup a taper home like a smuggled sun and light your rush from it, more to feel borrowed ceremony than to gain brightness. Faith is a heat source when you are allowed to call it that. The chronicles you grew up with love a big winter. They count the years by icicles, name whole seasons after frost. One speaks of a year when wine cut with an axe, another of ink frozen in the inkhorn so the scribe wrote in fits and starts like a bad conscience. Another of wolves seen on the edge of town as if the forest had decided to attend Vesper. You leave the wolves to their literature and attend to the practical. Keep animals watered even when water refuses to be. Keep children dry even when air seems wet with cold. Keep coals alive even when wood pretends to be stone. At night, you close off rooms with cloth and humility. One bed becomes everyone's bed, the way a ship's cabin becomes everyone's floor in a storm. Bodies collaborate. You abolish modesty with a joke and restore it with a blanket. You put your back to the byre wall and your feet to the wrapped stone and the wrapped stone to the idea that you have done enough. You arrange a watch, not formal, not heroic, just the promise that whoever wakes first will check the ash, pat the shutter, listen for a weight they don't like in the roof. You do not announce this plan. You wear it like a nightcap. Out on the frozen river, boulder towns set up market stalls on ice in some centuries, barrels for legs, planks for prudence, as if commerce could persuade water to pretend a little longer. You will hear about such fairs in years beyond yours. Your river is smaller, your fear larger, and your purse perfectly happy to shop on land when land returns. You content yourself with sliding a little on the lane when no one is watching and calling it exercise. Joke 2. You award yourself a medal for not falling near witnesses. It's a very small medal. It weighs nothing and clinks in the heart. Bread becomes an argument you win with patience, not yeast. You proof dough near the ember bank, coaxing it to remember warmth so it can remember being bread. The crust comes out thicker than poetry, and you saw slices rather than tear them because the crumb is honest and refuses to be polite in this weather. You dunk it in hot liquid so it will soften its opinions. Your teeth approve of diplomacy. You count your remaining onions the way a treasurer counts saints' days, carefully, with an eye to which ones keep the town cheerful. A pot of onions and oats, salted like a reasonable sermon, feeds a line of bowls and reminds everyone that hunger is a problem best solved early and together. Almsgiving is easier to preach than to practice. The village practices anyway, exchanging coins of labor, wood, stew, and watchfulness. What the Lord does with his granary is important. What the parish does with its pots is survival. The door freezes at its sill. You learn to persuade it with a warmed knife, not force. The latch string goes brittle and finally snaps. You replace it with a plaited cord made yesterday at the hour when your fingers were still ungrateful to be alive. Every break is a lesson in redundancy, which is a long word for have to when you can. Night stretches. You inventory jokes and spend them carefully. The cap has achieved full professor emeritus. Your mitts insist they are now officially saints of small warmth. You knight the cat for courage in the face of nothing in particular. Joke 3 lands with a sleepy grin and does its job. It keeps panic from growing antlers. When you do step outside, morning is pewter, and the world sounds muffled as if God has put a fingertip to his lips. Breath feathers. Trees crack in the distance like musket fire from a war about weather. Across the fields, smoke climbs in unusually tidy columns. Everyone's rules have improved overnight. You salute the columns with your kettle and promise to keep yours behaving. You hold two truths at once. The winter on the page, with its famous frosts that scholars date and debate, and the winter in your hands, with its stubborn door, tired water, greedy ash. The page version has big names. Yours has good neighbors. The page version asks whether this year is part of a little ice age, and if so, when it began to lean colder. You nod to the question and return to the broom, the bellows, the spoon. You don't live in a theory. You live behind a shutter that sticks when it's honest. By evening, you've taught the house new manners suited to siege. Fewer openings, slower fires, thicker soups, closer beds, briefer walks. You kneel to the embers with an affectionate scold and tuck them under ash as if putting children to sleep. You hang the cloak on the peg where it becomes a curtain against door gossip. You fold into blanket and stone and breath until your body stops writing angry poems about your toes. Tomorrow you'll do it again, because mornings arrive even when weather has tenure, and you would like to be there to see one. You start to hear the cold before you feel it. The roof has a vocabulary, a long, low creak as the thatch settles under fresh snow. A sharp tick when a reed contracts, a sigh that could be timber remembering a summer wind. You lie still and let the house speak its nocturne. The wind combs the eaves with careful fingers, playing a tune for rafters made of patience and smoke. Every draft you banished earlier has turned into silence. The remaining air has a sound you can almost count. Outside, snow hushes the village the way a hand hushes a room. Footfalls turn into small confessions. A fox writing cursive, a neighbor crossing to check a byre latch, a dog stamping each paw like a drumbeat with paws for sticks. Even your own breath becomes a metronome. Soft clouds brushing the linen and vanishing as if they change their minds about being seen. You lift the blanket edge and the sound changes from held to loosed, then back again when you tuck it. Cloth, it turns out, has acoustics. From the byre wall comes a soft shifting, hooves planting, hay rustling, a hollow mouthful chewed to the tempo of calm. The cow's chain touches wood with a prudent clink. A hen mutters once and resettles, a feather sliding against a rung like a bow across a viola string. In winter, animals make the most reassuring noises you know, the small grammar of living. You map the room by ear, hearth to your left, slow ember murmur under ash. Door to your right, latch breathing shallowly. Roof above, whispering its old reed prayer. Mainstream fact, sound travels differently in cold air. Density and temperature layers bend it, sharp edges carry farther, so a distant cart on frozen road can seem closer, and a church bell can ring cleaner across a frosted field than in summer haze. You can sometimes hear the mill creak's absence, the way its usual gossip goes missing when it's captained by ice. Tonight you hear the not hearing. Water muted. Mud edited. Wind delegated to higher offices. Far off, a bell notes the hour like a coin tapped on a table, thin and exact. The shutter gives one small crack as frost tightens its grip and then falls quiet, chastened by your wedges and cloth. The rushlight flame hisses a private S as a bead of tallow shifts. Then the flame steadies and resumes its almond pose. You realize the house is a choir and your job is not to conduct it but to agree with its timing. You inhale when the roof sighs, you exhale when the ember pops. Even the cap on your head has a sound, the soft rasp of wool when you move your cheek on linen. Too loud for a pillow fight, you think. Perfect for a lullaby. Outside, the night stages a show for anyone with ears and no tickets. Trees crack in the distance like musket fire from a war about weather, trunks shrinking and popping against bands of iron-cold air. Somewhere on the river, ice booms with a deep whalebone note as plates shift and speak to each other in glacier. You do not see any of it. You still hear it. Winter composing with wood and water. A child might wake and assume giants. You, older, Assume physics wearing a cape. You both go back to sleep. Quirky tidbit. When snow is bitter dry, well below freezing, it squeaks underfoot, tiny crystals scraping, a sound like biting into very clean bread. People swear they can tell the temperature by squeak alone. You've done it yourself. A squeak means breath promises to be visible, and water promises to be stubborn. Frost also writes on windows with a sound you imagine rather than hear. Ferns etching silently while the shutter listens. You run a finger along the bar. The wood answers your fingertip with the texture of properly cold. You think of the road at night and the watchmen in towns who walk with clappers or bells, calling the hours. Past midnight and all is well. Their voice is a kind of civic blanket. Your lane has no watchman, only neighbors who become one another's clocks. A door latch clicks 3 cottages over. Your mind notes a wakeful soul tending embers, and your room warms by an idea. Community, it seems, has acoustics too. A tiny drama. An ember under ash finds a pocket of air and utters a dry kiss, then a whisper. You wait for a spark that does not come. The ash settles again with the faintest susurrus. Fire, banked, has the courtesy of a sleeping cat that occasionally says, "I'm still here." You roll a hand toward the hearth until fingers find the bellows handles, and then stop. No need to wake a polite guest. You enjoy the certainty that if the ember asks for a breath, your hand knows the road by feel. The night opens a dark ear to farther sounds. Over the fields comes a thread of song, someone in another cottage humming a line while they stand by their own red under ash. It dissolves into wind before you can identify the tune. A dog barks twice, lower than alarm, more than boredom. Perhaps at the fox you heard, write its cold cursive. The fox does not submit a rebuttal. A moment later, silence resumes its office. Mainstream fact once more. In manuscript margins and winter sermons, writers relish describing great frosts. Bells with clappers frozen, ink refusing to flow, voices brittle in the air. Chroniclers love listable spectacles, the Thames bearing booths in another country, the Baltic solid from shore to shore in another century. But ordinary villages carried winter by ear. Mill falls quiet, wagon axles squeal in complaint. The thatcher's spar knife is silent until April. Historians still argue whether the coldest decades arrived in a continuous long slide, or in jolting episodes, and whether weather alone wrote social change, or only annotated it. Either way, your roof judges this hour by creaks, not climate graphs. From under the blanket, your own body sounds different. Wool softens the scrape of sleeve on sleeve. The wrapped stone contributes a faint ping as it cools, and the linen tightens. Your breathing and the child's breathing braid. You hear their dream make one surprised sound, half laugh, half sigh, and decide the dream involved warm bread. You smile because your ears have learned to bake. On the far lane, a cart goes by, runners on frozen ruts ringing a low steel tone. The driver keeps his voice to a murmur, as if night were a sleeping neighbor. You taste the sound as much as hear it. Iron, distance, good horse. When it fades, the quiet returns in layers instead of all at once, like a choir leaving the altar one voice at a time. Another tiny drama. A mouse attempts the pantry. Before you even reach for a shoe, the cat performs a small punctuation mark on the floorboards, one soft thump, a sharper tap, then a very satisfied silence. Order restored, applause withheld. You reward the chorus with a whispered good, which is also something you say to the room and to yourself. Wind changes. The plank near the latch tightens and stops its almost creak. Another plank, near the byre, volunteers, Snow lifts off the roof in small drafts and patters down the thatch like a hand clapping lightly in gloves. You think of summer rain and file the thought for later. Winter requires all your metaphors to wear coats. In the porch, frost has likely grown a garden on the iron ring of the door. If you touched it now, it would sing a small, dry squeal against your glove. You don't touch it. You catalog it by ear from bed, because the ear can travel where the body sensibly refuses to go. The room recognizes you as a listener and lowers itself into a comfortable key. You rehearse the morning by sound, the poker's ring on trammel, the quern's gravel sigh if the mill still sleeps, the bucket's lip against the well, the child's boots thudding twice by the door, the cow's low comment when you arrive with warm water. The day will have music again. For now, the night prefers a near silence full of useful clues. The last thing you hear before you slip is the embers' barely there hum and the smallest brush of linen on your cheek as you breathe. It is so quiet you might mistake it for nothing. You know better. Nothing is louder than worry. This is something. A room built out of wood, reed, earth, cloth, animal, and intention. Each piece making exactly the amount of sound a safe night should make. Joke, softer than a mitten. If winter were grading, you'd get full marks for listening. Winter doesn't grade, it only keeps the class long. You pass by staying. You let your hearing drift outward to the hedge, the field, the river, then back to the payas, the blanket, the stone. The world keeps its slow, cold conversations. You add the old human answer. One more settled breath. One more ordinary heartbeat. One more minute given to sleep. Voices are a second kind of fire, and tonight you build one. You tilt the rushlight so it throws a kind oval, pull the bench close, and invite the room to climb in out of its own thoughts. Company changes the temperature even before anyone speaks. The air softens as if it remembers how to be breathed. You are not throwing a feast. You're staging a little concert for embers and ears. The cat decides to be audience rather than critic and folds itself into a comma by your ankles. Good. Commas mean stories can keep going. You start with the easy music, a work song slowed down for evening, a tune whose words have learned all the right knots. The melody knew fields first, now it learns hearth. You hum, then sing, and the sound catches on the rafters like a shawl hung to warm. A neighbor takes the next line. Another adds a drone in a voice that could convince winter to mind its manners. The child on the pallet sits up halfway, eyes the color of ember cores, and contributes the important part, which is enthusiasm. Mainstream fact. There are old traditions of winter singing that aren't church at all. Wassailing for one. In some places people go house to house with a bowl of hot spiced drink, offering health and luck in exchange for hospitality. In others they troop to the orchards instead, singing to the apple trees around Twelfth Night, splashing cider on roots, and asking politely for a good harvest. You tell the indoor version tonight. A bowl, a verse, a cheer that knows how to be modest indoors. The bowl is wooden, not grand, and smells of cloves and good intentions. You mix a simple wassail, ale or cider warmed, a spoon of honey if fortune passed by, a pinch of whatever spice was hiding in the back of patience. A heel of bread floats like a small island that never sinks. You lift the bowl with two hands and say words that have always been more about hope than poetry. Wassail for be whole. Good health. May next year remember kindness. The room answers with drink hail, and in that moment you can claim fluency in an ancient language without learning any grammar. You sip, pass, and listen as the warm travels around the circle like a lantern that doesn't mind being shared. Stories start to volunteer. The neighbor's father saw a crow lay out straw before a storm and swore by crows forever. The child tells a tale about a goat who learned letters in order to read when supper is served. You confess to slipping on the lane and saving your dignity by greeting the ditch as if you meant to visit. Laughter fits inside the cottage the way heat does. It expands, then settles, then leaves the walls shinier. Joke 1 lands with a clink. You knight the bench for services to balance, and the bench accepts the honor by not collapsing. A quiet spell arrives. That's the watch's cue. The embers need a quick check, not a speech. You fish the poker's hook where your hand expects it. Lift the ash carefully, and reveal the red coins of heat blinking up like patient eyes. Don't wake them to bragging. Just let a breath from the bellows stroll past. 2 pulses of air, not 3. The red deepens, then covers again. Watch is mostly waiting, plus a little remembering and a little mercy. You tuck the ash smooth and return to the circle, leaving the fire like a well-situated friend at a gathering, content and not smoking. A neighbor sings a carol that carries older bones than anyone here, a star song with a step that turns the room into a slow wheel. The tune fits winter the way a cap fits your ears. Whether its exact words were written this century or last is a race between memory and parchment. Either way, the refrain knows where to find the heart's door in the dark. Historians still argue whether the household repertoire was mostly sacred or shamelessly mixed. Church-sanctioned texts sung by day, mischievous local verses by night, and whether the melodies we call medieval are truly from these rooms, or later visitors wearing borrowed clothes. You compromise by singing whatever the room knows and letting the room decide why. Quirky tidbit. In orchard wassails, people sometimes crown the apple tree man, the oldest tree, dress it in ribbons, and press bits of toast into the branches for the robins, the spirit's messengers, or just beloved birds with good PR. Toast in trees gives you permission to think of winter as a polite guest instead of a landlord. You consider tying a ribbon to the broom handle and calling it a ceremonial branch. Everyone deserves pageantry at least once per season, even broomsticks. The watch keeps time by stories as much as sand. Each tale is a measure. 1 ember tend for a long ghost story, a quick bellows kiss for a riddle, an ash smoothing during a pause when no one minds if you get up. You pass the bowl again, thinner now, hotter still. Faces in the russet light turn into the sort of portraits that make future painters panic. Nobody here is noble. Everyone here is necessary, and necessity looks excellent in warm tones. Someone starts a call and response, a wassail verse that prompts a household to declare what it has and what it hopes for. Here's to our mare, someone says, and you answer, and to her foal, although the mare in question is 3 fields away and currently asleep under the same cold sky as you. It doesn't matter. Blessings travel well. You raise the bowl toward the roof so the thatch gets its share, then toward the byre wall so the cows can feel included by osmosis. The cow shifts and sighs, which you choose to interpret as assent rather than critique. The cat climbs into the nearest lap and agrees to be stroked by whichever hand isn't holding the ladle. Cats tolerate song as background for petting. You perform to standard. Joke 2. You inform the cat that it's been promoted to official taster of ceremonial beverages. The cat blinks once in a tone that means, finally. You decline to share. The watch has a schedule, but only the embers know it. You take turns without ceremony. Whoever wakes in the night listens, pads to the hearth, and gives the fire its ash blanket back if it has kicked the covers off. If the rushlight has gone sulky, it gets trimmed and encouraged. If the shutter mutters, its wedge is preached to. No one writes this down. The instructions live in your hands and in the local constitution called, "We don't freeze if we don't get foolish." When your turn comes, you stand, tuck the cap-tail, and do the ember dance with the grace of someone who knows where the poker sleeps. A neighbor remembers an old midwinter custom. Dice or knucklebones rattled in a bowl while someone tells a fortune for the coming harvest. Onions left on the mantle to choose which field will thrive. Games that turn fear into something you can hold and shake. Whether those fortunes come true is beside the point. They make the dark less managerial. You place 3 dried beans under the bowl. Yes, beans again. And declare that whichever one sprouts strongest by spring will name the lane's luck. Beans, pleased, try on their responsibilities at once by being perfectly bean-shaped. Mainstream fact circles back. Winter gatherings often folded charity into cheer. Alms at the church door on cold feasts. Gooding rounds by poor women at certain holidays. Bowls carried from house to house with blessings traded for coins or bread. Villages ran on that barter. Song for soup, heat for help, a place by the fire for a hand with the quern tomorrow. You feel the invisible ledger balance as someone sets down a skein of wool for you to mend later, and you promise a spare bundle of kindling in exchange. Warmth accumulates, counted in favors rather than logs. Outside, wind suggests that you all should be miserable. Inside, someone starts a low-nonsense chorus, fa-la-la with local improvements, and your mouth learns it before your mind does. The chorus is simple, which is what makes it durable. You could sing it while carrying water, spinning flax, or banking coals, and it would still punch cold in the nose. You give it a few rounds and find your shoulders have stopped trying to live near your ears. Everyone looks a little less like winter owes them explanations. When the bowl is mostly steam and the rushlight bows toward its last almond, you make one more round. Ash smoothed, bellows quiet, brick checked, shutter wedged. Then bank the room with words. We'll wake one by one, you say. Tend the red, and pass the warm. It isn't an order. It's a song with chores. Heads nod. The cat does not nod, but it keeps your lap from cooling, which is consent in feline. Joke 3, drowsy and true. You declare that if the apples hear you from their bare branches, they're welcome to dream early blossoms as long as they bring fruit in proper time. Otherwise, they'll be assigned extra verses. You receive no official reply from the orchard, which you take as a promise to consider your petition. The watch settles into its quiet relay. You fold down under the patched blanket, listen to a final hum of human voices thinning into breath, and feel the room keep burning in a way that has nothing to do with flame. Somewhere far off, other cottages are singing to their own red hearts. You do not need to hear them to be warmed by that fact. You sleep in the shared rhythm of a village that refuses to be a single ember. The dark thins at the edges like old cloth, and your body knows before your eyes do. You come up from dream the way a diver comes up from a lake, slow, practiced, already reaching for the shore you can't yet see. The cottage is a held breath. You slide your hand from under the blanket, find the bellows by memory, and pad to the hearth with the reverence of someone entering a chapel with soot for saints. Gray first. You ease the poker through the ash blanket, and the embers answer with a red the color of cherries thinking about summer. Not ablaze, never ablaze at this hour. Just proof that last night's patience survived the dark. 2 small breaths from the bellows. Shh, shh. The glow deepens like a pupil widening. A twist of kindling laid at the rim catches manners, not pride. You let it char, then tuck a little ash back over. Because dawn asks for steady heat, not theater. The hearth answers with a low purr that makes your shoulders decide today might be manageable. The bucket lip bites your fingers. The water has turned to glass with an attitude. You tap, then press, then break the skin with a careful knuckle so the ice sighs in defeat and sinks like a sulking plate. A dipper's worth goes into the small pot. The rest waits its turn to become liquid enough to be called water again. The cat appears, yawns the size of an ordinary kingdom, and inspects the operation as if you might have hidden fish in there just for drama. You do not rise to the bait. You are not that kind of playwright before first light. You rouse the wrapped stone from its bed, touch it with the back of your hand, still warm enough to remember you, and set it by the trivet to take on duty again after breakfast auditions. The rushlight, marzipan and yesterday's jokes, gets trimmed to a clean wick. The almond flame steadies and throws a small oval of morning that refuses to be bossed by the window. Outside, the shutter creaks once, frost negotiating with wood. Inside, you count your breath, and the cottage counts with you. Mainstream fact: many rural days orbited church bells, prime after daybreak, mass on feast days, angelus at set moments, sound as schedule when sun and season played tricks. Not every village kept perfect time, but a pre-dawn ring could set bodies moving long before daylight took attendance. You listen for the far bell from the next hamlet. On fair mornings it comes clean as a coin tapped on stone. Today the cold bends sound strangely. You hear a thinner, older note, then only the cow shifting against the byre wall like a friendly clock. You pull on hose, mitts, cap, turnip mode restored, and nudge the door. It holds for a second, welded by the night, then agrees to the plan with a reluctant crack. You spill a ribbon of ash outside to mark a path where feet will recall the ground. The sky in the east has learned the word pearl. Your nose reports that the air has opinions. You file them for later. The cow greets you with patient steam. You rub a little fat along ear edges and the bridge of her nose the way you did on the cruelest nights. She leans into the kindness with the gravity of someone who has seen worse weather. A hen, dislodged by your footsteps, remarks that dawn is an offensive rumor. You hand her a handful of grain and the rumor improves. You crack the ice in the trough with the haft of the broom and watch the water turn honest again. Your fingers ache like stubborn parishioners. You put them in your armpits, then back to work, because warmth is a verb. Back inside, the ember field has graduated to polite flame without your having to bully it. You slide the oat pot closer. Last night's plan returns to the table like a neighbor with good timing. Oats remember kindness. You stir with the spoon that survived 3 winters and 2 repairs. It answers with a soft wooden syllable that means breakfast. A scrap of apple from the loft goes in, the sound turning briefly wet and cheerful. A pinch of salt tells the pot you expect competence, not flattery. You portion out the morning's small labor in your head, the way a reeve portions pasture. Grind enough grain on the quern to stretch bread until the mill thaws. Fetch a barrow of dry sticks from the lane end before the world wakes to argue about it. Mend the cloak seam you promised your neighbor. Check the ridge for mischief when the sun lifts the frost's pride. Barter onions for a little wax if the bee-man's widow has any to spare. Your back lifts an eyebrow at that list. Your back is not management. You promote your knees to optimism, and they accept with conditions. Quirky tidbit. Some households kept cock candles, or tide candles, tapers scored with marks, so you could tell time by how far the wax had fallen when roosters and bells disagreed. You have no wax to spare for such luxury. You scratch a charcoal line on the rushlight bracket instead, and pretend it is a scholar. The cat pretends to read it, and pronounces you late for petting. You comply. Academics must be appeased. You wake the child with the oldest alarm known to village kind. You put warm porridge under their nose and let the steam tell the story. They emerge, hair in negotiations with gravity, and deploy a spoon with admirable speed. You kiss the top of their head, which smells faintly of smoke and decent dreams. You tell them the day's plot, the short version, and they accept their role without audition. Sort kindling, carry in a small armful, check the draft snake at the door seam. Tell the cat it is beautiful, important for morale. The cat agrees to be beautiful for at least an hour. You taste the oats. Heat unwinds along your throat and lays a long hand on your spine. This is central heating you can swallow, the only kind available in a century that does not sell radiators. You add a little more water and stretch the pot for a neighbor's bowl. The rule is simple. If you can, you do. It comes back around in sticks, in salt, in a watch taken at midnight when you didn't know you needed one. Historians still argue whether households like yours move through true first sleep and second sleep most of the year, or only in depths of winter when darkness demanded it. Diaries and sermons suggest a middle waking used for prayer, mending, or brief visits across lanes, but not every roof plays the same script. What your roof knows is simpler. You wake when embers need you, when animals speak, when cold suggests an adjustment. Names for the intervals are a luxury. The intervals themselves are work. You tighten your belt a notch looser than daywear, breath first, vanity later, and pull the cloak over your shoulders for the first trip to the lane. The door complains, then forgives. The world outside is a page written in gray ink. You fetch the bundle of thinnest sticks and the cache of bracken you stashed where the eaves keep secrets. Your feet find the ash path by memory even before light helps. An owl regards you with scandalized eyes for disturbing union hours. You apologize and receive no pardon. Back in, you feed the new sticks to the edge of the small flame and savor how noiseless competence sounds. No woomph, no smoke tantrum, just wood deciding to become warmth at a dignified pace. You put yesterday's damp logs where the smoke bay will persuade them to dry. The cottage, now warmer by degrees you can't measure but can trust, begins to smell like a day that has agreed to start. A plan becomes sentences. Carry water once the sun can help. Turn the quern while the child rehearses letters with a stick in the ash. S for shutter, B for brick, C for cat who thinks it invented both. Walk to the widow's and trade thread for wax. Ask at the manor gate if the woodward will open the coppice sooner this week. Storm took more fuel than manners last night. Keep one ear for the church bell. If it rings early, take a bowl for someone who might not have bothered to start their own pot. The to-do list feels heavy until you lift the first item, then it feels like a day. You split one billet on the block by the door. The iron sings on the grain with a sound that means even frozen wood can be persuaded. Your hands smart but stop complaining once blood remembers the route. You stack the halves by rank, shy kindlers, decent citizens, stubborn ants, and award yourself a smile for organizing an empire of sticks before dawn. Joke 1. You promote yourself to Chancellor of Small Fires. The cat requests a cabinet position. You grant it Minister of Warm Knees. Steam curls from the oat pot like a friendly ghost. You ladle 2 bowls, one for here, one for the door you'll knock on after sunup. Bread slices thin and goes into the steam to learn softness. You drizzle a last spoon of last year's honey and declare the morning good even if the sky wants to debate terms. That declaration is not magic. It is policy. The first true light interrogates the shutter, and, finding it sensible, tries the crack by the hinge instead. You let the room brighten on its own. You are busy knitting hours together with small, practiced motions. If a bell rings, you'll mark it with a cross in the air and a nod that tastes like gratitude. If it doesn't, you'll still carry the bowl across the lane, still break the ice a second time, still set the quern to its gravel song. You do not serve the weather. You negotiate with it. Joke 2. Small as a pinch of salt. You inform the spoon that it has been promoted to sun deputy until the actual sun arrives. It accepts its badge with grace and then continues being a spoon. Tools have excellent boundaries. Before you step out again, you smooth the ash one more time over the glowing bed. Gray over red. Patience over promise. You tie your cloak, tuck the cap-tail into its loyal turnip knot, and pocket a bit of touchwood and flint because hope is better with redundancy. Outside, the east has remembered a color you can name. Inside, the cottage purrs like a well-fed thing. You favor both with a glance that says, "Thank you," and both pretend they didn't hear, which is how you know they did. Historians still argue whether our sense of morning routines fits poor houses like this, whether a tidy sequence survived every season, or if winter scrambled even the best of plans with cold's rude pencil. You live at the intersection of ritual and weather. You keep the rituals small so the weather can't steal them all at once. Joke 3. On your breath as you lift the latch. Today, you will attempt 3 miracles: boiling water, finding your other mitten, and not slipping where the owl will laugh. 2 out of 3 would be canonization material. You step into the nearly day and take the first careful, ordinary stride toward it. Dawn doesn't so much arrive as confess itself. The east bruises from pewter to pearl to a thin wash of apricot, and the frost takes its bow like a tired actor who knows the show is only half over. You balance the 2 bowls, one for you, one for the neighbor, on a wooden board and open the door into a morning that crunches back at your first step. Breath blooms, then vanishes. The lane is fed by paths of ash from a dozen doorways, a little map of stubbornness drawn in gray. You make the first delivery without ceremony. 3 raps, a pause, a 4th that says it's only you. The door opens a finger width. A face appears, soft with sleep and gratitude. The bowl swaps hands. You trade small words that matter. Warm, enough, later, and you both know they mean, we're still here. On the way back, the church bell finally takes pity and rings a thin, brave note that the cold cannot quite swallow. The village inhales together. You tend the hearth as if the day were a guest. Ash leveled, kindlers fed, a decent citizen of a stick promoted with honors. In the pot, the last of last summer's peas volunteers for service. A sliver of salted pork travels from the crock to the pan like a rumor becoming policy. You slit a loaf, saw-toothed and righteous, and set the slices to steam over the pot until they repent of their hardness. Jokes, small and awake. You appoint the spoon marshal of the morning. It continues spooning with admirable restraint. A short walk to the bakehouse then, because dough is democracy. You carry a bowl under your cloak, a little tent of linen holding hope that smells like yeast and yesterday's advice. The lane there is busy with elbows and steam. Someone has chalked times on a board, and someone else is accidentally ignoring them with the authority of a person who knows the oven's moods better than clocks. Mainstream fact. Many villages shared a communal oven. Manorial or parish ovens in some regions, where households brought their loaves and paid in coin, labor, or kind. It kept fuel use sensible and bread-baking uniform, and it put gossip, trade, and heat under one arch. Your loaf receives its distinctive mark. 3 slashes you always make the same way, so you can claim it when the batch returns roaring brown. While the bread learns courage, you walk the ridge path. The thatch wore snow in the night like a heavy hat. Now ridges drip. You prod, listen, prod again, then leave a quiet prayer on the ladder rung for later. When the roof can be courted without slipping. You glance at the herb patch, nothing but stiff memories, but your mind fills the gaps. Time that once hoped, sage that will forgive late spring, mint with the planning capacity of an invading army. You pocket a dry sprig for scent and call it optimism. At the byre wall, you rub the cow's forehead and check her water again. A hen scolds you for not being seeds, and then forgives you the moment you are. The cat follows like punctuation. You refill the draft snake at the door seam, tug the shutter's wedge, smooth the floor rushes into a path that will be kinder to winter's thin-footed walkers. Work multiplies when you give it eye contact. You give it just enough, then pull away so it doesn't try to adopt you. A boy from the manor brings word. Coppice will open this afternoon for top and lop if the woodward gets his porridge. You pack a heel of bread and 2 stories you've been saving for bargaining, and you plan for a barrow at third light. The miller's daughter tramps past with a bucket that keeps remembering it used to be ice. You nod a hello that translates as, when the wheel turns, we turn. You hear a cart on the road and step aside, letting a carrier pass with sacks that smell faintly of cities, salt in disciplined cloth, a rumor of spices, iron that wants to become hinges. You trade news for news, river nearly passable, bridge sulking, market postponing, the sort of information that lets you plan without pretending to be in charge. He asks after your household. You answer with a shrug that means, we're mended where we can be, and fed enough to try again. A small gathering assembles by the bakehouse while you wait for bread to return with crust. Someone has a riddle. Someone a plan for mending the footbridge plank that behaves like a dramatist. Somebody says the cold is worse than last year. Somebody else says years are not comparable and refuses to be drawn. Historians still argue whether the truly brutal winters clustered in long swings or arrived as stubborn episodes, and whether Little Ice Age belongs to your morning or to future books. Your stance is practical. If today bites, feed it soup and do not argue with calendars. Your loaf returns with a crackle-like bark. You press your ear to it and let the crust's music say, I'm done, a language bakers speak in all weather. You carry it like a son and resist tearing a corner until you reach the threshold. There, you tear off a thumb's worth, lay it on the windowsill for whatever small St. Mine's crumbs, and then bury the rest under cloth while it cools just enough to spare tongues. Food into bowls then, a quick count of onions, a promise to the pot that it will learn new ideas at midday. You set the quern on the bench and turn 20 honest revolutions. Grit powders your sleeves like a badge. The child practices letters in ash with a stick and possibly invents a new one shaped like a chicken. You applaud the orthography of poultry. Quirky tidbit. Some people nail house leek, a fat little succulent, to the ridge or keep it in a pot near the door, believing it shields the home from lightning and fire. Whether it works or merely looks like green courage, roofs approve the gesture. You picture a sprig up there come spring. The sky thickens, then changes its mind. A sun the color of brass polishes the frost until the lane glitters like gossip. You tip what water is left onto the doorstep and watch it slide. Then seed ash so afternoons won't collect ankles. You keep an ear for wheels, bakers returning, reeve inspecting, a peddler who swears by his knives. You keep an eye for the beam of a neighbor who isn't as quick as they pretend. You stand ready to pass a bowl, a stick, a laugh, and never the last of your fuel unless the day insists. Charity isn't currency. It's anti-weather. The day grows louder with work, tramping boots, cow complaints, the quern's gravel hymn, the rhythm of the axe, split, lift, stack, and the little choir of chores that push you toward noon without theater. You set another brick by the hearth to warm for tonight's feet, because night is only ever 12 hours away, and you have learned to greet it in advance. You tuck 2 extra wedges in the shutter's corner for the evening wind you know by smell. Then you stop. Not for long, just long enough to inventory blessings while they're true. Embers that survive and obey. Bread with a crackle and a voice. A roof that sheds. A door that forgives you for using it too much. A small human beside the hearth tracing letters and cats with the same seriousness. A village that returns bowls full and favors paid. A spine that still lifts a bucket. Fingers that still tie a knot. Heat enough to say, "Tonight will find me." Mainstream fact, before the light moves on. Many parishes marked February with Candlemas, blessing candles for the seasons ahead, carrying fire in careful procession, reminding themselves that winter always eventually hands back the keys. Whether that rite has already passed or waits tomorrow depends on the year and the priest's calendar. The feeling in the room is the same, light tabernacled in wax, saved for storms and sickbeds, a visible sigh of relief held in a little golden stick. You look at your rushlight clamp and imagine it holding beeswax one day, just once, and you promise to sing to it when it does. You sling the cloak, set the cap, shoulder the barrow handles. The coppice will open, and you will take only what tomorrow can spare. Deadfall, top and lop, future heat that doesn't steal roofs from spring. You tell the house to keep its promise while you're gone. It creaks a yes. You tell your body to keep its promises while you work. It answers with a yes that sounds a lot like hunger. Bread goes in a pocket, along with a flint, a curl of touchwood, and one joke, just one, to spend when the lane needs mending from the inside. You step out into a morning that finally admits to being day. The sun is small but present, the cold is real but negotiated, your legs are yours. You walk toward wood and work, and a night you have already started to warm. The room grows softer at the edges, as if the thatch lowers its eyelids and the rafters take one long, contented breath, and you let your own breath follow. Slower now, rounder now, almost a tide that remembers where the shore is. The ash lies smooth over the ember, quiet promise, not performance, and the small warmth at your feet becomes a gentle conversation that needs no words, only patience. You feel the blanket's weight settle, friendly and certain, and the linen cool against your cheek, and the cap holding the night away from your ears the way a hand might shelter a candle from a breeze that has already changed its mind. Outside, snow, if there is snow, keeps its hush, and if there is only frost, it keeps its silver, and if there is only dark, it keeps that too, like a simple bowl that happens to be full of quiet. The cow breathes a slow halo into the timber. The hens become careful commas on their rungs, and the cat, more confident than any saint, arranges itself in the shape of ease and demonstrates, in case you forgot, how to do nothing bravely. You lie still and let the house hold you. Reed above, wood around, earth below, cloth upon, ember within. A small universe of uncomplicated kindness, turning the long night into ordinary minutes that ask very little and give just enough. Thoughts wander toward doors that are already barred, and chores that will wait politely until morning introduces its first pale color. And then those thoughts wander farther away, like footsteps going down a lane you do not need to follow. What remains is breath, and the steady weight of sleep approaching without hurry, and the simple agreement that you are warm enough, safe enough, Tired enough, now. Let the ember keep its watch. Let the roof remember its summer. Let the air learn your rhythm and keep it for you until the bell, or the bird, or the light says otherwise. For this small while, you do nothing. For this small while, the night does the rest.